Previous guest writes the first question. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you rock and roll with it.
Awesome. Thank you. So first question. What we got in here, Paul?
What was your dog's name when you were in the 3rd grade?
It's not that.
Oh, okay.
This is a pretty good question. What was your most enjoyable moment in the past year? And it's going to be kind of as I'm thinking about that, a little bit interesting because it involves a death. But my girlfriend's great uncle passed away. And the interesting thing about that was that he lived in France. And so it was this kind of last minute thing where we had to scramble to be able to get to France to go to the funeral and be with her family. And she actually hasn't seen that family a lot. And so she wasn't, at first she was kind of hesitant on, well, do we go? Do we drop everything we're doing? And how do we and I was just like, all of a sudden, no, we have to go. Like, this is important for you. And the backstory behind that is that her dad passed away when she was about 2 months old. And he was the closest man that she had known to him. And she hadn't really put all those things back together at that point. And I was like, we have to go to be at this funeral, be with your family so that you can use that to, help you move past the things that you experienced when you were younger.
Was she from France originally?
She's from Morocco, actually. And her mom's from Morocco and her dad was from France, and they met in Morocco. She was born in Morocco, came to the United States when she was 5. And when we went, it was just, I didn't know what to expect from her family. They lived in the Pyrenees Mountains, and they were, they lived in this mountain house in this community. And it happened to be a nude colonist.
Oh,
so they did
you embrace it and just drop your clothes at the door?
I didn't embrace it, but when we showed up to the top of the mountain and the men that were in their 70s were fully naked, I was like, okay, all right, I guess we're doing this. So, but we arrived and it was about a 15-minute drive up the driveway up to the street to the top of the mountain. It was just beautiful. And we had such a wonderful time with her family and connecting with them, and her just seeing old pictures of her dad that she's never seen before. And it was one of those moments that you just, it was so spontaneous that you didn't plan it. We weren't planning on going to France, but we we have to do this. And, I'm grateful that I just had the mindset for her, hey, no, this has to happen. And so that was one of those things that, I appreciate that I was able to give her.
What time of the year did you guys have to go?
This was, I think it was in July or August. It was a great time to go. It was beautiful out. And,
first time in France?
It was my first time in France, yeah.
Have you been to Europe at all before?
Yeah, I have family in Italy. So I was in Italy in February of last year. And, I've been there about 5 times. I've been to Spain. I did a backpacking trip with my ex-wife when we were together before we had kids. And, loved to travel, loved Europe, and loved the food there and the people, and it's cheap.
What part of Italy is your family from?
So they're from Calabria, which is the southern part. So my grandparents lived in this small Italian village with 3,000 people on the top, in this mountain town. And it's just, I think the first time I went was after my grandfather had passed, and I was 3 and a half. And I actually still kind of remember a little bit about the trip, and it's a magical place.
I asked because my dad's side of the family is the Italian side for me, and he's from Naples.
Okay.
And he was born there, came here when he was a teenager. I just haven't been yet, and I need to make it. It's one of those things where as you get older, and people always say, oh, when I retire, I'm going to travel more.
Right.
Well, if you retire, but you still keep yourself busy, it still falls into a scheduling thing.
Right.
And then if you really step back and you really look in the mirror, it's just not making it a priority.
Yeah.
I need to make it a priority to get over there. I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we make what priorities are important to us, right? It's everybody says, I don't have enough time for anything. And I'll challenge that every single time. You make time for the things that you find important, or your subconscious will run the rest of it. So one of my things I talk a lot about is our subconscious runs 85% of our decisions. We make around 35,000 decisions a day. That's a lot of decisions our subconscious makes. We should try to figure out how we dial that in.
Do you think that when you say our subconscious makes it, I wonder how much of it is, I don't want to use the word give up, but we give control to our subconscious out of almost a laziness. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
We get into patterns and we just stay in that pattern.
I think when it comes to the story we tell ourselves, it's very easy to like what I've found was I needed things to fall apart in my life for me to take a look in the mirror and be like, oh, you know what? I need to look at this. And then getting around other people that actually talked differently about life, whether it was relationships or career-wise or purpose or whatever it is. And I think one of the things that's so important for us to recognize, we don't know what we don't know. So when we start to open up our mind to the possibilities of things and that it might not be, because, you know, in the academy, it's, well, repetition over repetition so that when shit hits the fan, your fight or flight is going to take over and you're just going to do what you were trained to do, right? That's what we were taught in the academy. That's why they do what they do. And it's the same thing about life. So like if first thing you do, you pull your phone out in the morning and you're checking Instagram, or, you know, the first thing you do is you're making pancakes and you're putting tons of syrup on it. Like your life is going to fall in line with those small choices. And when we start to see those choices differently, people don't realize how much we have to offer our own lives and our own story and the process of it. It falls back to that. And
I don't know if it's really a saying or not, but at the end of the day, you are a direct result of your habits.
Yeah.
What you choose to do every day or don't choose to do every day is a reflection of what you see in the mirror.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't like what you see in the mirror, what are you going to do about it? Right?
So your mom and dad are from Calabria, or just?
My dad's from Calabria. My mom, I don't know where her family was directly from, but her father's parents and her mother's parents were right off the boat from Italy. We don't have contact with any family members that are over there, but you know, I grew up in a very Italian household. My dad speaks a dialect of Calabrese, and you know, I always bust his balls, and I'm like, you know, why didn't you teach me when I was younger? And he's like, oh, you know, your mom, she didn't speak it, so I didn't want to make her feel bad or what. I'm like, Dad screwed me. Like, yeah, you know. So, but my grandmother made that homemade pasta, and when we were in high school, she was like in a newspaper article for meatballs she made for our soccer team, and it was very part of like our life at a very, very high level. So,
where is that hometown at for you?
In Massachusetts. So are you talking about Massachusetts?
Like where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Hadley. It's a small farm town between Amherst and Northampton, and the University of Massachusetts is right next door. And it's actually called the 5 college area. So we have like 5 different colleges and universities: Smith College, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke College, Amherst College, and then UMass Amherst. So it's a very high education area. It's in this place called the Pioneer Valley. So we have like these small hills, like nothing like you guys have over here, but we have mountainous, and it's very green, lots of cows, lots of corn.
What drew your family to that area?
So actually UMass Amherst drew my dad there. So when I was growing up, my dad's CPA, that he started his own firm. He didn't really plan on creating his own firm, but he was doing 2 things at the same time. So he was doing this college campus ministry called the Navigators. And so he was on campus at UMass doing that, and then he was working full-time doing accounting. And so he went to school in Boston and got connected with the Navigators, and then got pulled into their ministry and brought to UMass. And then that's where I was born. Then we moved to New Hampshire for a couple of years and then came back.
Where I was going with it wasn't your family was in, you said it's agriculture, but they weren't farmers or anything like that.
In Italy they were. So we did own pieces of land in Italy where they would do like olives, and they would do all kinds of fruit and stuff like that. But that wasn't what I grew up in. So my parents grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Okay.
And that's where they were high school sweethearts. That's where they met. They went to Catholic school, and then they stayed together throughout college and went to different colleges, and then ended up getting married right after college.
What about your family-wise as far as immediate brothers, sisters? Are you the only child?
I'm the oldest. So I have a younger brother who actually lives in California. He's in Redondo Beach.
So he's the
area.
smart one.
Yeah. Well, he is right now because it's warm and it's now winter in Massachusetts. So it's a little bit colder. And then my sister, she was actually in California for a while. She was up in the Bay Area. And then they moved back out to Massachusetts it was around COVID. So it was like 21 or something like that. She has a 2-year-old son. She's about to have another child. So exciting things happening for her.
You and your brother and your sister close?
Yeah, we're pretty close. Like I think I didn't really, the moving I did after college was I moved to Boston. And so I didn't like go that far away from home. And then they just went West Coast. So the distance obviously makes it a little bit more complicated, but yeah, we're pretty close.
What drew them west?
My relationships. So my brother's wife, her family's in LA. They lived in Portland, Oregon for a while. They own a house up there, but they're now renting it out. And then he's going to school in the Bay Area or Oregon. I can't actually recall where he's going to school, but he's doing like remote work. He wants to become a therapist.
It wasn't like when you guys were kids growing up, we're like, man, we're going to California, and you just didn't.
No, it was like it was relationships that kind of ended. Like my sister, her husband went to Berkeley for like his master's or something like that. And so they came out this way. He had a job and they kind of stayed out here for a while.
As far as when you were a kid and growing up, you mentioned soccer already. Were you into sports your whole life and were you really into sports, or was it always kind of maybe a peripheral thing for you?
I was pretty into sports growing up. Basketball, baseball, soccer. My dad coached most of them. I didn't really continue those a lot through high school. I stuck with, it's fun. I actually left my public high school and went to a charter school that was like it's funny looking back, but it was a performing arts school. And so there was a lot of dance and there was a lot of music, and it was just an interesting place to like go to school for a couple of years, but it didn't do so well there. So I came back. And
what made you go there in the first place?
That I felt like a black sheep.
When it comes to sunglasses, first responders and military members definitely don't baby them. They get dropped, thrown in a utility pocket, or tossed in gear bags. Frontline Optics was created for that reality. You get premium eye protection without paying designer brand prices for something that won't survive your lifestyle. From polarized UV 400 lenses to anti-reflective coatings and water repellent finish. And here's where Frontline Optics separates themselves from the pack. When life happens and your glasses break, they offer a no questions asked replacement program, even for prescription lenses. On top of that, Frontline Optics was founded by a firefighter, and a portion of every purchase goes to support the First Responders Children's Foundation, helping families of those who gave everything. So if you're looking for sunglasses that look good and come from a company that actually understands the job, visit frontlineoptics.com and use the promo code TRANSITION10 to get 10% off your purchase. Frontline Optics, from a first responder for the front lines.
So I didn't have the relationships, like, being, maybe it was 15. I didn't have the friendships. And then I had one friend that was going there and it was, I just felt different. And so I wanted to go be around people that, maybe I would enjoy, and didn't really end up that way.
Was it impacting you outside of school? Were your grades dropping and all of that? Or was it merely hey, everything else is cool, I'm just not clicking with the people that I'm going to school with, that made you change?
So growing up, when we moved from New Hampshire back to Mass, right around the time my mom found out I had like dyslexia and I had struggled with a learning disability and all these pieces. And that took a huge toll on me throughout school. I didn't do well. I didn't read. It was such a struggle for me. And my dad did a really good job of trying to help me progress even outside of school. He would buy Hooked on Phonics. He would sit down with me. He would do the work with me, and I wasn't having it. And so that on top of, it was a very small school. Like at the end of it all, when I actually did go back, we graduated like 36 students.
Wow.
So it was very small. And I had friends up until elementary school, but when I went into middle school, things had transitioned. I just felt alone. And so I didn't want to feel alone anymore. And so I had this one friend that was my best friend. He would sleep over at my house all the time, and he was going there. I was like, oh, I want to be around him.
How long did you struggle with the dyslexia before it was actually diagnosed?
My mom was pretty on it. I was in first grade in New Hampshire, and she was able to kind of put the pieces together. So that when we transitioned, I ended up staying behind a year. So I did first grade over again. And then they started to, back then, it's interesting enough, my two kids, they both been diagnosed with dyslexia, and things are just different now. Like they're a little bit more on top of an IEP. They're more dialed into like the accommodations and stuff like that. But back then it was different because they weren't really that accommodating. So my mom had to like fight for it. And so she was pretty on top of it pretty soon, but they didn't have what they have now in terms of resources.
Is dyslexia one of those things that has levels to it where you can be more dyslexic or less dyslexic, or is it just you're dyslexic? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I don't know what the scale is. I just tell people I'm super dyslexic because right. I think I always have these words that I always misspell every single, like something. I always forget the E in something. And it doesn't matter how many times I try to correct myself. I have to I see the red, like it's subconsciously, I'm always writing, I'm misspelling it, or appreciate. Like I always misspell that word. And it's like a word I use a lot. And it's something that, I'm like, I have to spend extra time working on like really simple things that most people is just easy for. And so, it kind of it brings in this, like, I have to do things harder than other people, but I've kind of just accepted that.
I want to stay on this for a second. We're going to obviously, you've already mentioned the police academy. We're going to get into your time with the Massachusetts State Police. But for somebody who might be listening right now, who also is dealing with dyslexia, what issues did you specifically run into when it came time to be a cop that you maybe had to put more effort into it? Here's something. I'm thinking to myself, if you're struggling with the order of things, you're cruising down the highway and it's time to run a license plate. Was that something that you had to address or gave you problems?
No, not really. Like I was more worried about. So most of my life, I was more worried about what other people thought.
Okay.
And so what I would get concerned about was like my report writing, and it getting kicked back multiple times, and you end up in court for an OUI and getting grilled because you misspelled something or this or that, and it's not perfect, and it's just, that was the stuff that I really worried about when it came to in the moment stuff. Like I thrived in that. And that was, I think that's probably, that was a big reason why I wanted to go into law enforcement, was because you got to handle the problem in the moment. And it wasn't something that getting more into the entrepreneurial space now, but back then it was like, oh, I don't want to do that because then I have to be organized and I have to do this and I have to prepare differently. Whereas in law enforcement, it was like, oh no, I have to deal with people in the moment and I get to overcome a challenge. And that was, I enjoyed that. I in college, I had the opportunity to work as a police cadet for UMass Amherst, which was right next door. And I fell in love. I was just like, this is my job. And I really thrived in that in the moment stuff.
You mentioning going to court and getting grilled on your report. And it just kind of took me back to any of us. I don't care if you're dyslexic or not. Every one of us has been sitting outside that courtroom getting ready to testify and re-reviewing our report going, what the hell did I write here? And then you go, oh, wait a minute. This was that report that I did at 3:00 in the morning and I was dead tired. And I, tried to remember everything. And because the thing is, you turn your report into your sergeant. They don't know the facts of the case. Right. So as long as it reads well, you're like, okay, I guess he covered everything. And then you're about to testify and you're like, shit, completely forgot a piece or something.
Right. Yeah. I got burned actually one time pretty bad, where I was like, I had the defense attorney telling me I was a liar and he was like trying to run my reputation. And back then, because of this dyslexia, I would copy and paste certain pieces that were like just standard. And I missed like a name or something like that. And he just, man, he just totally ruined me on the stand. I was able to keep my cool with it, but afterwards it was so funny. He just comes up to me like nothing just happened. We were like cool, we're friends. I'm like, I don't even know you. And I get it. You're doing your job. Like that's part of it. Like you should totally come after me for that, but don't come up to me after and try to be buddies. Like that's just, go fuck yourself.
But the other thing to that though is how many other people read that report up until it was time to go to court? Your sergeant had to review it. The DA's office had to review it. The attorney that was handling the case had to review it. Nobody ever caught the fact that you had somebody else's name in that cut and paste to where maybe if the attorney handling the case jumped on it sooner and go, hey, did you, and because I guarantee you in front of a jury, you're like, hey, I've got dyslexia. And there's parts of my report that I copy and paste because they repeat themselves all the time. I made a mistake. I didn't change the person's name.
Right.
So it's one of those things where a lot of people, I think, arbitrarily assume that if your report's been reviewed, boy, it's good to know, because every one of us, and I'm not saying you were lazy. When you're reading your report, you know the facts. So your brain's going to fill in anything that's inaccurate or incorrect. Mm-hmm. First off, but when your sergeant's, so all these different levels of review and still nobody else caught it. It's just the nature of the beast with our careers.
Yeah, because there's just so much information. So they're going through it. And then you have some guys that are getting, then you have the sergeant that is nitpicky, which is going to save your ass, but you pissed at him because he just won't just approve your report. And so you got this like balance of like, I want to send it to him because he's going to take forever to approve it. And you want to get things done as fast as possible because maybe you want to go home. Maybe it was a late call. And
so you're too young for this, but for my old timers listening, back in the day when you would handwrite reports and you turn it in and the sergeant would go, yeah, put a paragraph right here. Like, Sarge, I can't just put a paragraph right there. I've either got to white out everything below it or I've got to rewrite the entire page.
Right.
Thanks.
Right.
But again, it's in time or with age, you look back and you go, if that sergeant was pointing out something that's missing, they're saving your ass in the long run.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's going to be interesting too with like AI coming and how that's going to affect report writing and all the information and how they're going to utilize it. Because I know with my job, we moved. They gave us this thing. It was called I can't remember what it was, but it was basically like a handheld recording thing where you could talk into it, and it was like the first time you could do like speech to text, but it was connected into the database, into the system. And this was a couple of years ago. I was so excited because I was like, oh, I can talk and it will go in spelled correctly and it would save us time. And you can throw on plates by saying it. And if you have it dialed in correctly, and the progression of technology and how that's going to help guys that do struggle with it and being able to, because the job never bothered me. It was always the paperwork stuff. It was all the administrative pieces. And that it was so important because you have to have 4 copies of this and everything has to be aligned a certain way. Otherwise it appears as if, we're lying about it, mm-hmm. or we're not, if it wasn't in the report, it didn't happen. Right. So it's like I think the old school way of, you put as little as possible in the report because we don't talk about those pieces. I mean, that's gone. Like if it's not in there, it didn't happen or something else happened, and so it's gonna be interesting to see how with body cams and AI and how they can all string that along and the level of oversight that's going to happen, because then now AI is going to be able to not to put fear in people's space. I think it's going to be a good thing in a lot of ways, but like it's going to be able to go through an algorithm and find pieces without even having somebody look at it, which could be helpful.
I'm now removed from the space 2 years into it now, almost 2.5 years. I would say that where I see it going with everything being recorded on body cam today, you're going to basically give a synopsis in your report. Hey, this is this was a case of a burglary. In this case, I interviewed John Smith and Jane Smith and refer to the recording for all details. And it's just going to be, hey, that's the recording. That's what was said. That's what wasn't said. You know?
Yeah.
I really don't see it being as, and again, this is just my 2 cents on where I see it going. I don't see it being report writing as much as hey, here's the recording.
Right.
dictate it or transcribe it, and that's the report.
Well, I think I might push on you on that one, Paul, because the other piece of it is, right, their perception of what was happening versus what was. So it's going to be, that part will be really important, because if you're in fear and you use deadly force, you know what I mean? Like, so there's going to be parts where the technology catches it and we don't. And then, you know, hopefully that doesn't bring us down a bad path where people are going to try to continue to degrade the profession itself. Because, you know, you and I both know, like 99% of the guys on the job are great guys. They're there for a good reason. They want to do good things. They want to help people. They want to serve. They want to see, you know, justice be brought for the people that are doing horrible things. And so it's going to be interesting how things progress.
Again, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just going to be, instead of fighting it, how can we embrace it and how can we best make it work for us?
Yeah. I agree with that. We ended up getting body cams really like late in comparison to the rest of the country. And, you know, the grumbling around that was, well, now they're going to be checking up on me and this and that. And we had stuff come out too, where, you know, guys would be doing something and the body cam got turned off and I got turned back on, and then guys got in trouble and stuff like that. But I always embrace it as like, oh, this is great, because then, you know, I know how I am with people when I'm, you know, on a traffic stop or I'm interacting with them. I was doing mostly homicide investigations through most of my career, and how like, oh, this is just going to protect me. And so therefore, like, I don't have to worry about, because I'm not usually an asshole. Like, I was the guy that didn't love writing tickets. I was the guy who was like, all right, you know, we got to educate you on this. You need to knock it off. And so that I knew, it was like, my mindset was, this is going to protect me. I'm only worried about not hitting the button so that they think I'm doing something wrong. That was the only thing I was worried about. But it's more of like, this is actually a good thing, that, because then now, you know, after people had body cams for so long, you know, the ACLU, they're like, oh, no, we don't want them to have body cams. And we actually have communities, because it's a pretty liberal area where I am. There's communities that do not allow the cops in their towns to have body cams. And so that they're like, well, we don't want them to have it because it's an invasion of our privacy. So it turned into this thing where because it was showing that cops were doing the right thing. And then all of a sudden it was, you know, oh, well, we don't want you to actually have them because we're seeing that everybody's being an asshole to you guys. It goes back to just what you get used to doing the job. I think for the older guys, when body cams first came out, they're like, son of a bitch, you know? You get used to using them. I was fortunate, unfortunate, however you want to put it. I was always one step, I'll call it, ahead of the progression. So I became a detective right before my agency implemented in-car cameras. So I never worked the road with an in-car camera. And then I transitioned to the DA's office just as my old organization was going to body-worn cameras. I retired from the DA's office just as they were making it mandatory that if you were encountering the public, if knowingly going to be out with the public, you had to have a body camera with you. Right. So I was always kind of one step ahead or one step behind, whatever you want to refer to it as. So none of my career, other than, like you said, a digital recorder, and there were times where you'd start the digital recorder and just throw it back in your pocket, but we always used it more for just so I didn't have to take as detailed a notes. Right. Yeah. It was always a benefit. As a detective, we recorded everything. Everything was on video camera. And I loved it because I could run an interview and not have to worry about taking notes. And I could focus more on the person that I was talking to, as opposed to head buried, you know, trying to remember everything that they were saying. Yeah, no, that was a benefit for me when I was doing investigations, because you didn't want to see my handwriting. Like it was horrendous. I can't even read my notes myself sometimes. So I was like, I have to have this recorded. So yeah, no, I hear you for that one. Now, you've already mentioned you were in college. You mentioned your brother and sister going to college. Was college in the sense of mom and dad were like, hey, you guys are going to college, or did you guys all just want to go to college? So my parents were the first ones in their families to go to college. We were around a lot of college students because I mentioned earlier, you know, my dad was a part of the Navigator. So we always had college students in our house. And you know, it's interesting with my learning disability and my struggle with that. My parents didn't really push that on me at all. But it was, for me, I think there was a lot of expectations I put on myself because of them. And I like school's hard. Like it was such a struggle, and I had, maybe C- grades. So I did apply to a bunch of colleges, and I only got into community college. But the thing that actually transitioned for me was I think in my senior year, I had a guidance counselor, and he's like, "Why are you applying? You should just go to trade school." And I remember I was like, is he fucking serious right now? Like, did he really just tell me like I wouldn't be able to do it? And so for me, that was like, no, I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna prove him wrong. And then I ended up going to community college, and then I went to a 4-year university right next door, and did well. I graduated with over a 3.0, and was the craziest part was I didn't even read any of the textbooks. I just figured out how to learn what I needed to learn my own way and get through it. And that was something I just put on myself. I didn't really my parents weren't like, oh, you have to do this. And I didn't figure out I wanted to become a cop until senior year
of high school.
Yeah. I was working for a flooring installation guy. He was a small company in my hometown, and I would do deliveries. I would go drive out to Boston in this big truck and pick up flooring and all kinds of stuff. And I was coming on my way back on the turnpike in Massachusetts. And it might even have been the worst rainstorm I'd ever seen. I think it was in the summer. And it was just downpouring to the point where cars had to stop. They could not drive. And then it cleared up, and we started to move, and I saw a state trooper parked. Like he had, I don't know if it was a DMV or if he had somebody pulled over or whatever it was. And I started thinking, I was like, huh, that's an interesting job. Like, I don't know what came, like why I thought that, but I was like, oh, like they're outside, they're doing exciting and interesting things. I'm like, I'm going to take a look into this. And then I changed my major, and then I got on with the police cadet program at UMass. And then I was like, oh, this is for me.
Do you have anybody connected to you in any way in law enforcement growing up?
No, I've actually never met him. There's one of my cousins, like I think a second cousin, he's a few years younger than my dad. He was in the, I don't know what the Cabernet or the Carbonari, that he was in either that or the state police in Italy. He actually would protect the judges in Sicily when the mafia stuff was going on. He had a pretty intense story of exiting because he almost got killed because he was doing on the protection detail, and this one judge he was working with was actually assassinated. And so like after that, he decided it wasn't for him. And then I have somebody in my family is in New York and part of the FBI, but I've never met him and I've never talked to him. So I didn't really have like that direct connect where I had an example.
When you started going down that route and became a cadet, was family supportive? Where mom and dad are like on board, like, hey, yeah, that's cool, or nah? Yeah,
my mom. So, because when I wanted to go to, apologize, I wanted to go into the Marines, and so this was 2003. 2003. So it was like it was after 9/11. There were, obviously we were overseas and in wartime. And my mom's like, no, you're not doing that. And so I was like, all right. And so I look back and sometimes I'm like, oh man, I really would have done really well in the Marines. It would have been really helpful for me, get me dialed in with some of the discipline pieces that I've had to learn throughout time. But I think that was probably an easier transition for her than the military. So, and we also, one of the lieutenants that worked at UMass, he was in our church. And so he kind of looked over me and kind of got me in. And so I think him being there and them knowing him kind of helped.
So you graduated what year from high school?
2003.
2003. And once you started down the path, you first were thinking, okay, Massachusetts State Police.
Actually, I wasn't thinking that.
Oh.
That was just the catalyst for it. Because I didn't know anything about the state police at that point. I hadn't been thinking like, oh, I want to be a cop, or what kind of cop do I want to be? Then I got in with UMass, and then I started to, we got in foot chases, and I got to do really cool training. I was in 2004, they had the Red Sox riots. So there was like, I don't know, maybe 5 nights in a row where the students were like rioting like crazy. There was one night that they had like a really good riot team, and they would do pepper ball. They would have the dogs, they would have the horses. And I was guarding one of the towers in Southwest. It was a pretty large building. It kept about 3,000 students in it. And I was behind the students, and they were in front of the students, and they pushed about 4,000 kids past me. And I had a baton. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have anything. Like, I was just like, well, I was like, cool. And then I went behind the riot line, and I was like, oh, I'm safe now. Cause it was like one of those moments like, oh shit, like this pucker factor was real.
UMass PD is its own PD?
Yeah. So the UMass has the university PD, and then the Amherst PD has the town PD, and they work pretty close together.
How big is UMass PD?
At the time, there were about 60 officers.
So decent sized organization.
Yeah. They've diminished quite a bit. I think they're about, last time I knew was about 35, but they had a very thriving law enforcement program, and they had a lot of training. And one of the chief at the time, she was actually she lived in my town, and she knew me really well, and she was just a wonderful chief. She got the guys like better guns, she got them good training, she got them on good schedules. She really took care of them, and so they really just enjoyed working there. And that kind of came. She was a cadet at Amherst, like decades before then, and that's where she started this program, and I ended up being on the second class of it. And so we had police powers, we had everything except the firearm. They put us through a boot camp for about 30 days. It was pretty intense. I had no idea what I was walking into. I was puking running up the hill. Like I knew nothing. And so that like opened up my eyes, and then I started looking around, and I was like, I wanted to be in the shit. So I was like applying to Atlanta PD. I was applying to pretty much any major metropolitan area. I applied, I wanted to be in a city. I wanted to be like where everything was going. And I really wanted to be at Boston. But when I graduated college, it was 2008, and the recession just hit. And so I started applying, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a cop. I already done it. Like, this is going to be easy. I really wanted to get on at UMass full time, and they haven't put me through the academy and stuff. And then it just got so competitive, even having connections there, you're making sure that, and I struggled with my learning disability. My test scores weren't phenomenal. But I was like, oh, I don't think that's going to matter. I have connection here. But then when you're ranked based simply off a number, it doesn't indicate, how good you're going to be as a cop. And then at that point, I just started applying everywhere. I think I did like 300 agencies over a course of 10 years. And I was so like, the thing about me, Paul, was I was so honest about like my background stuff. So I think when I was like 15,
it took you 10 years to get hired.
Yeah. I have a binder at home that has 154 rejection letters in it.
I don't mean this as sarcastic as it sounds. At what point do you kind of go, maybe this isn't the career for me? And I don't mean that in the sense of you weren't able to do the career, but it's like, how many times do you get doors slammed in your face? 10 years ago. I mean, especially when you're trying to then factor in the on top of that, well, shit, once I eventually do get hired, I got to go 20 or 30 years to get a retirement out of it.
Yeah, no, it's just, that's what I was the only thing I was focused on. That's what I wanted to do.
Did you get your degree in criminal justice?
Yeah, I got my degree in criminal justice. I didn't think it was going to be that hard. Sometimes you apply somewhere and it takes 2 years to get back. So it wasn't like I wasn't in the industry. My goal was I graduated school. I got a bunch of friends together. We moved to Boston together. We were trying to do this thing kind of like the show Friends. So we had like a good community. We were in the city. And I knew it was going to take a little bit of time to get residency because the way it works in Massachusetts, it was a civil service list. And so I knew it was going to take some time to do that. I knew it wasn't going to be like
that's this. To get with Boston PD.
Yeah, you have to live in Boston. Well, at the time, I think they've changed things a little bit. You have to live in Boston, And in order to gain residency, so like the way they rank it is if you're a resident, then you're bumped above everybody else that took the test. And if you're a veteran and you're a resident, you're bumped everybody. It doesn't matter if you score a 70, you still get bumped up above it. So they would give these preferences. And then Boston would do things like, if you're a woman and they needed more women police officers, they would do a woman only list. Or if they wanted more minorities, they would do a Spanish speaking only list. And they could do those things based on the laws and how it was. And so, I didn't know any of that stuff at the time. I just knew I studied a bunch of different things. And I went, when I moved to Boston, I got a job as a loss prevention agent at Home Depot. So I was kind of staying in the industry. I was there for a year. I got on with CVS Pharmacy doing loss prevention. And that was a little bit cooler because my boss was really cool. And he ended up getting me into a training program. So I became a Boston Special Police Officer. So I had arrest powers. That got me connected to Mass General Hospital, where they had a police and security agency. So I was able to lateral into there. And I got my special state police, like sworn status.
What's a special police officer?
So it's like you have arrest powers. You have the ability to be basically a police officer, but you're working. So in Massachusetts, the special state police, I think things have changed because we went because of they switched to a certification, like a police officer. I can't remember exactly what it was, but
are you a state employee or are you a city employee?
No, you're a private employee, but it's just certified by the state.
Okay.
So they do use that a lot for colleges, like non-university colleges, and they would use it for other hospitals and the like. And Boston police had something similar for Boston. So like for loss prevention, so they didn't have to have their cops come out and
to a degree, then it's a step above a security guard in the sense that you actually have powers of arrest, where a security guard's not going to have powers of arrest.
Exactly. So I could effect arrests. I had handcuffs and stuff like that. It made me feel a little special, like I was actually still in the industry. But I wasn't. I look back now and I was like, I wasn't really a cop. I kind of was, because you still face the same dangers in some ways. Just without a firearm. So it was a little bit different.
Oh, so it's a non-armed position, but still.
It depends on the agency.
Okay.
So at Mass General, we did not carry firearms, which was kind of crazy because we had multiple shootings that were on site. And actually, before I graduated, I was a summer police officer in Provincetown, and I worked there for a summer. That was more full police powers, firearm. They put us through training and stuff like that. So I got a taste of another agency that was in a town where we did traffic stops and we did all different kinds of things and stuff like that. But
now, along the Eastern Seaboard, do most of the beach towns have those summer police officer positions?
So they did. We had this thing called a reserve police officer program. And so you could be a part-time police officer and you could essentially go work for a small town and just work, a couple hours a week or by, per diem or whatever it was. And so they would use that on the Cape Cod. There's a lot of different agencies on the Cape because in the summer it was flooded with people and they just needed more bodies. That went away with the MPTC and the standards, the police standards went up after COVID. And so that you couldn't, you had to do a full-time academy at that point. So that's when that kind of transitioned.
No, opposite to that. I know, like here in California, you can put yourself through an academy. And I've met a lot of young men and women who are struggling to get hired like you were. And they went, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put myself through an academy. That gets me a step ahead. So when I go to a police agency, hey, you don't need to put me through the academy. I'm good to go. Just put me on the road.
Yeah.
Is that an option in Massachusetts?
You can. You have to be sponsored. I probably could have gotten sponsored. I don't know what it was about my mindset at the time, but I was like, no, I want to get paid to go through the academy was, I think, what I was thinking. And
there's the pay aspect, but I'm always the one who says it's great that you want to put yourself through. If while you're going through the academy and you get injured when you're putting yourself through, if it's a significant enough injury, you're not covered. Nobody's responsible for you. You're on your own. And so at least if whatever like you mentioned, hey, even if UMass would have just put me through the academy, while you're in the academy as an employee of UMass, if you get injured, you're their responsibility.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too for me was, like, I kind of mentioned that, like, I was just too honest. When I was 15, I think a friend of mine asked me for some weed, and I didn't smoke weed after like 19 or something like that. And I got him the weed. And like, when it came to these questions, like on the background investigations, I was like, did you sell drugs? I was like, oh, I guess I did, but I can explain this. And then so I answered it like naive and just like, I'm super honest. Like, they're going to see the integrity behind me. And it just bit me in the ass so hard. I remember going down to Baltimore PD. I was applying for Baltimore PD, and I had signed up. They had this out of state process, so you could do the test and you could do this and you could do this. And I get in there, and they didn't even let me take the test. I filled out the questionnaire, and they're like, it doesn't matter. Like, we don't care. And I was like, I came all the way down here for this. And I even went as far as to apply to the Pentagon Police. And they had this, like, they had a process that you could go for one day, and you would do the test, the PT, the interview, and everything. And they grilled me so hard on the weed thing. And I was like, this is like, it's not a part of my life. And like, I was younger, like, our brains aren't fully developed. Like, it wasn't like, I didn't know I wanted to be a cop when I was 15 years old. And that was my, it was just like this, it was super arbitrary. I wasn't a drug dealer. It wasn't like smoking pot a lot. It was just a couple of times, and I was honest about it. And I was like, oh, like, I'll be honest about it. That's the whole part of the profession, integrity. They're gonna love this. And
they want integrity after you're
right.
hired.
They want it after you're hired. So I started to realize that even how the tests were set up and how the process was, is they're actually encouraging people to lie and not even realizing it. And then, that was like a bitter point, but I just kept pushing forward. And then there was a point I was going to transition. I was at Mass General, and one of the guys there, John Grenny's great freaking guy. He's one of those guys that you would just start talking and you would just like listen for hours. He had all these stories. He was in the sheriff's department, and he encouraged me to go get my paramedic license. And he was like, you might want to think about the fire department, because it's easier to get on there once you have, like, similar to how I was telling you about the residency and the veteran status. If you have your paramedic license in Massachusetts and you take the civil service test, you get bumped to the top of the list. And so, because they're in such need of them. So the fire departments were moving in that direction. And I was like, okay, I'm going to check it out. So I got my EMTB, and then I was like, I kind of like this. And then I went and got my paramedic license, which was like 2 years. And I was like, I then transitioned to Boston EMS, where I was on the ambulance for about a year there, did really well there. Saw a lot of crazy stuff. And then
never enough to pull you away from actually still wanting, like, in that little voice in the back of your head, like, hey, I still want to be a cop.
No, I actually wanted to transit. I was thinking it was going to be a better move for me, because you go in the fire department. I was thinking Boston EMS to get a lot of experience, to get the trauma experience, get in the moment, be really exposed, learn fast. And then I was going to move to a fire department to basically get on the schedule. So I would be like working 2 days a week, and then it would be better for the family. So I was already transitioning in that way. I was starting to enjoy that idea. And then the letter came in the mail out of nowhere after, I took the test like 2 years prior to that. And so then it came in the mail, and then it was from the state police. It was the one agency I didn't want to work for, because their academy is one of the most difficult in the country. It's overnight, like, beat the crap out of you. Like, I was terrified of troopers after, like, through high school. I got pulled over by troopers, and they're just, it's kind of changed a little bit in the last several years. But, right when I came on, like, that, I carried something in Massachusetts, because we had such a reputation. So we would go to, like, disturbance calls where the local PD was, and it would just be me or just one trooper. You show up and everybody shuts up. And it would just be like that energy of like, we have this reputation, you don't want to mess with us. And people knew that in certain parts of the state. And so they would, like, if you showed up, it was a totally different vibe than the local guys. And so I also knew that they had a 30% dropout rate. It was really difficult. It wasn't like the local academy. Not that they weren't difficult, but it was just, you got to go home at night. And so, like, we went from 5:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. No breaks, beat the crap out of us. They even woke us up a few nights, and it was just, and you couldn't, at the time I was married, the first week, my ex-wife, she was pregnant and she actually ended up losing the baby. I didn't even find out about it till the weekend. And so it was like this, I didn't want to do it, but then I was like, well, I've worked so hard. Like I got to give it a shot. And so I remember going in to get uniform fitted and I was just terrified. And I was just like so excited because I'm putting on these uniforms. I'm like trying these. I'm like, is this really happening right now? But it was like once you get there and you start to get into the mindset of it, it was okay. But it was like I was terrified. I didn't really want to do it. I was kind of hoping that I was going to sabotage myself so that I didn't have to do it. And the funny thing too is that I was trying to get on Boston PD because I really wanted to do city work. And after I got the card for the state and I started going through their process, at that point, it was just like, whoever comes first, I'm taking it. And then I got a card from Boston PD. I got a card from Cambridge Fire Department, which was like probably the number one place to work for fire department because, you know, they don't do transportation for their EMS calls. They just treat and then they're just responding. And they have like they're one of the more high paying ones. It was one of the more ideal agencies to get onto for a fire department in the area. And so both of those cards came in and I would have had to respond to them while my first week of the academy. And it was just kind of like this moment of like, like that's what I really wanted, but this is what I'm at. And so I had to, I think, but at the end of it all was, you know, I was so proud to be able to get through that, not quit, to, you know, be able to stay in the middle. Like I wasn't praised for being at the top but I wasn't one of the guys that they were just ragging on the whole time. So I was able to just kind of keep my head down, get through everything, did pretty well, graduated.
Anything that really gave you heartache while you were in the academy?
Sundays, going back, I would cry.
So they let you go home on the weekend?
Yeah. So I think that was worse because Friday was like this big exhilaration. You had this dump of dopamine. I'm going home. I don't have to be with these assholes. And then Sunday would come and it was like, oh no, like I have to go back. I have to get back into the flow of it. I have to get back into the mechanism of it. And I would carpool with a group of guys that were local to me and we'd go about an hour.
Where is the state academy at?
So it's in the middle of nowhere. It's in New Braintree. It used to be a prison. I think it was designed to be a prison. And it's an interesting part of the state because it's, you know, if you almost think about like the Bermuda Triangle, there's no cell phone service. The weather there is always wacky. Like there's more snow there for some reason. I don't know why. It's not like the elevation's any different. And they had this huge water tower where when we drive up and you'd see that, your gut would just hit your belly. And it was just, oh no, like what's going to happen? But we would get up at,
is it like a movie like that dark gray stone and just seems like you're going into more of a dungeon?
Yeah. Because we had these thing called the rat tunnels. So like there was three buildings that were the primary buildings. There was A building, C building, and then there was B building that was in the middle. That was the cafeteria was. There were some of the classrooms in there, and then A and B were where the dormitories were. So we would call them, you know, our hole. And so but there was a tunnel that would connect them all, and we call it the rat tunnel. And so when it was like poor weather out, they would have us running through the rat tunnels, and you know, it's to keep us safe so we didn't slip and fall or something like that. But it was just funny, all the different words that they would, you know, the language we learned, like being in the academy, like the ladder well, it was all military terms, right? Like when you talk about the head, I got to hit the head, or I got to, you know, buy your leave, or whatever terminology. It was just, you know, very different than what I experienced at UMass.
The nearest city or town is how far, like when you say you're out in the middle of nowhere, I mean, how far would you have to go to find a supermarket or a gas station or something like that?
So it's probably different than out here because everything's just so much bigger. So for us, like the closest town or a grocery store would probably be about 20, 30 minutes, which is not too bad.
But that's still pretty remote.
Yeah, it's pretty remote. Like there was Sturbridge was really close to it. So that's where, like, that was close to the turnpike. So they had a bunch of restaurants over there, Dunkin' Donuts. They had a couple gas stations. We would all, so like I would commute with these guys. We'd leave at 3 a.m. We'd all like kind of convene, like maybe like 50 to 80 of us at this Cumberland Farms. And we would all like use the bathroom. And then we're like, all right, it's time to kind of get going. And then I would get to the academy. They'd get our gear out. We would get to our holes, and I would run to the bathroom because I knew I needed to take a shit before I went and PT'd. And so was my routine on Mondays was I would run to the bathroom, make sure I could take a shit so I didn't have to shit myself during the runs. But that was, it was an interesting place because the dynamic was, I think when the local academies, like, you're in the same class but most of the guys were different agencies. So there was like a closeness there, but with the state, like we showered together, we slept together, we did everything together. So like I wouldn't see guys for a couple of years because, it's not a huge state, but, I wouldn't necessarily see them all the time. And I would see them, like 3, 4, 5 years later and be like, dude, how are you doing? It was like this camaraderie we had because we went through probably one of the most challenging times that we ever experienced together.
So the only people at the State Police Academy are state police officers or state troopers.
Yes. So if you were a local police officer and went to the local academy, you had to go to the State Police Academy. So you had to go to another academy.
No, what about flipping it though? If once you're already on as a state trooper and you wanted to go to like Boston PD, would they still send you back through their academy?
No. Yeah, you would be able to transfer that. That it's interesting because that, the state police in Mass was the most one of the most paying hiring agencies. And so most local guys, they would work in their local agency or city or whatever, and then they would want to get to the state. That was like, when I was coming up at UMass, that was like all the guys were like, that's the $1 million ticket because you could do the details, you could do this. And that's flipped since then where guys are actually leaving to go to local agencies. You never left the state like while I was coming up or when I first got on. And then now it's kind of shifted where now local agencies are getting paid more than the state and guys are leaving. They're like, I'm not going to stay here. If I can make more over here in this community and not have to drive 2 hours from my house. Cause that was the whole thing was when you first got on, they would ship you out. And so you'd have to take the drive and it wasn't paid and you'd have to go and start your shift and then you drive home. And depending on if you're on night shift, I was living in Boston at the time when I first got on, I'd have to come home and it was like 2-hour drive home sitting in traffic because I'm coming with traffic into the city, like during a work week where everybody's going to work. I'm trying to go home and go to bed.
For California, people who aren't familiar with the state, to go from the southern end, San Diego or even LA, to the northern end of California will take you anywhere from 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah. Ballpark-ish.
To get across the entire state of Massachusetts is about how long?
About 2.5 hours, depending on traffic. So like depending on, if you're coming from west to east and what time of the day, because Boston it's not LA. It doesn't have that level of congestion.
Right.
It's a pretty small, it's a walkable city. I mean, I think there's the population's around 1 million in the city. And then it's like 3 million for metropolitan area, but it's not that big. So, but it's about, if you were to go from Cape Cod, so the tip of Cape Cod, because the Cape itself is about an hour, from the tip of Cape Cod to Western Massachusetts, probably about 4.5.
From a new boot perspective, people coming out of the academy as a state trooper, where did you want to end up? And then on the flip side, where do they send most of the new guys?
Yeah, so I grew up, when I came out, most guys just wanted to get home. They wanted to be in their local troop so that they could leave, they could start shift on their driveway. That was basically like, they wanted to be able to radio in that they're starting shift. So that was like most guys, what they wanted. Not my class, the class before mine I graduated the 82nd RTT. The 80th was the first class that they had in 6 years. So prior to that class, the 79th RTT.
There's a moment in life when you realize it was never about you. Grind, spelled GRND, is different. There's no I in it on purpose, because the mindset was never about ego. It's about the mission. Started by a former Army Ranger, it's not about where you are. It's about how you show up. Different lives, different pressures, but the same mindset. Grind isn't clothing you wear just to look good. It's a reminder of why you keep going when it gets tough, and you keep putting in the work when no one's watching. For the early mornings, the late nights, the the reps that no one sees. This isn't just fashion, it's fuel. Because real work isn't loud, real effort doesn't need applause, and real purpose doesn't quit. Head on over to thegrndcollective.com and use the promo code TRANSITION15 for 15% off your order.
They spent 6 years commuting, meaning you didn't usually shift guys around unless they had a new class because there wasn't space for them. There wasn't new opportunities. So like those guys were traveling for 6 years to like probably an hour, usually about an hour, sometimes longer for just the start and end of their shifts.
Now, obviously working for the state, and I'm going to use the example. I still remember this story. So somebody here who works for the California Highway Patrol. The academy's up in Northern California, up in Sacramento. You get some kid who's from Southern California, no big deal, because odds are this is, 20 years ago now, but either you were going to get sent to LA or you're going to get sent to the Bay Area, San Francisco, were the two big areas that you were a new state highway patrol officer, that's where you're going to go. The city that I worked for without traffic was about 45 minutes east of LA. Mm-hmm. I remember one Sunday morning, early, 8 or 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, quiet. One of the CHP motor officer coming out of the mountains because we were right against the foothills. I ended up sitting there shooting the shit with him for a bit. And he was from NorCal and he had just got sent down to Southern California. And his goal was, I'm just biding my time till I can get back up. Because if you're familiar with California, have you heard of Lake Tahoe?
Yeah.
So he was from that area. That station is a prime station. That's where people want to get to. So he's like, dude, there's no openings. I can't get there. But for me to get back home, that's where I need to get to. So I'm just biding my time. So long way around. My question is, obviously, some guys are going to want a station that's more convenient to where they actually live. But where were the prime stations? Like, oh man, I want to get there. Because you mentioned earlier, hey, I want to get in the shit. Where does somebody want to get to as a state trooper?
So it's an interesting agency because the guys just talked a lot about money. And it was one of the things that there's different, because the state police in Mass is so different than other agencies. We had so many different opportunities. Like they had the SWAT team, they have the intense canine unit, they had the homicide investigations, because in Massachusetts, unless you were in Boston, Worcester, Pittsfield, or Springfield,
state police are handling everything.
We're handling all of the homicides in the whole state. So so unless you're in one of those 4 cities, like we handled every homicide. And because it would fall under the jurisdiction of the DA's office and they would assign troopers to that. So there was a big contingency of guys that were doing homicide investigation. There was a lot of other specialized investigations, a lot of task force and stuff like that. So a lot of guys wanted to get out of the uniform. And there was a bunch of different ways that they could do that. But then there was other guys where, for us, this happened a couple of years ago, but the Turnpike was a place for guys to retire, was a place where guys would make money. And it was the place where ultimately we had a big scandal a few years back that shut that all down. And so there was the airport, which we had jurisdiction over the airport, and then the Turnpike, because those were the 2 places that had like unlimited overtime, and it had, they had the best equipment and they had the best detail rates and stuff like that.
So even though I'm assuming you're talking about Logan Airport in the city of Boston, you guys were still the police presence for the airport.
Yeah, we took the police presence for that. We took all the state, because we had a couple mergers back in the 90s. We took all of the state parks. We took certain state grounds, and we would there was just a lot of different things that we did. And the Turnpike was separate because it was a different budget, and it had always been like that. And so it was this weird troop that basically stretched along the entire state, broken up into 4 different barracks. And they, that was like, it was almost impossible to get into the E-troop is what they called it at the time, the Turnpike, because those guys, they were just hustling, and they were just, they were making double what everybody else was making because they had basically unlimited overtime.
Pull their shift and then another shift, go home, sleep for a shift, and right back to it.
They just hustled with that stuff. And they would, and they got caught up in, changing documents and stuff like that kind of shed a lot of light on what they were doing. But the interesting thing for me was that I actually, when I graduated the academy, they would put you in a troop that was pretty close to home to break in, before you would get assigned anywhere. And so I got assigned to the Turnpike that was my first assignment. And they only had, we graduated with 158, and they only had 5 guys going to the Turnpike to do that. And it was like the second time they had done that, because they typically didn't put guys on the Turnpike because they were all older. The guys they weren't excited to have a new boot with them to this or that. I remember my trooper coach was just like, all right, go sleep in your cruiser. Like, I'm not doing anything. Or it would be like, there's so many things about that troop it's different now, because now it's all young guys, because they eradicated the whole thing. And it's just now it's a part of it, of the normal troops that were in the geographical area.
But it's cool. It sounds cool. And if they're still doing it, where they try to put you in a troop or a station house, whatever you want to refer to it as, that was geographically convenient to you, as opposed to what is the bigger need of the organization.
Well, and then the beginning part, because they were training you, they make you take your personal car. So you didn't have your own cruiser at that point. So we all were assigned cruisers for, right, like after we finished break-in is what they would call it. And then we were actually assigned. So we were commuting in suits and our own personal vehicles to these locations. So I don't think, we weren't able to throw the lights on or go down the breakdown lane or do different things to be able to get there. It didn't make sense for them to do that yet. So they at least kind of honor that. But then once you graduated from break-in, then they just shipped you. And I was actually really fortunate that they did boot me, because initially I was going to stay on the Turnpike, and then they had the scandal like a year after that. And, we had a couple guys went to jail, and I knew them. And it was such a blessing from God for me that I didn't stay there, because I was gonna stay there. Some guy filed a discrepancy on it, and then they ended up shifting me later. It was like one of those moments where, like, even though it's on paper, it still didn't happen. Like, there was an assignment and my name was there and I was staying, but then it still didn't happen. It was like one of those moments, and then they shipped me, and I was so grateful, because afterwards I was like, man, I don't know how I could have gotten tied up in that, because a lot of guys got tied up in it. And if it's cultural, it's the friction for people to do things that aren't right so easy. And that's where I think a lot of guys get caught up in those situations, because, you have a lieutenant telling you to do something, you're going to do it. And so you don't have this resistance to be, oh, well, I'm not questioning the lieutenant. You don't do that. Like, that's not something you do. You don't question the authority of the supervisor. He told you to go home, so you go home. Like, but then they get caught up in all of these things. And then the hindsight of it all is like, well, you shouldn't have been doing that. It's like, why? How can you tell me that? I'm being told by a lieutenant to do this. Like, and so I was grateful that they kicked me, and I had to commute about, it was just under the 75 miles where after 75 miles, they'd pay you like an extra 75 a week or something like that. So it was like 72 miles. And so I would drive from Boston to this town, Athol, which is like another no middle of nowhere town. And it was very rural. It wasn't much highway. We did there was a couple of towns we covered. And we would, I was with my classmates. So it was actually kind of fun. And it was interesting. I was glad I actually made the commute eventually, but at first I was pissed, because I was like, I want to be home, I want to be close.
When you talk about the corruption aspect and in the history of law enforcement, for the most part, you hear the stories more on the East Coast than you do on the West Coast. And I think that's one of the where, if you work LAPD, there's a lot of history and prestige behind it. But for the most part, most of the law enforcement agencies, especially in Southern California, but a lot of California, even into Arizona, Nevada, maybe not in Nevada as much, but where I'm going with this is it's a bunch of small agencies all butted up to each other. But you're not going to hear about massive corruption issues, because you're talking about little ones and twosies. Whereas on the East Coast, you get like the state troopers. That's the whole organization for the state. And on top of it, they're the law enforcement for some of these smaller pocket areas. So you have that history, and there's the positive, the traditions, the history, but there's also the negatives of the history of what just gets ingrained and just repetition after repetition of next generation of officer coming in. Hey, this is how we do it. And like you said, lieutenant says go home. I'm a new guy who's on probation. It's not like I'm going to go, no, Lieutenant, that sounds wrong.
No, you're not going to do that at all. Like, it's just, that's not how it is. And, one of the things about cops that, we all know is we don't change well. And so like the shifts and changes of the things that happen, that we went through a lot of changes after I graduated. So I touched the tail end of whatever it was more like back in the day. And honestly, it wasn't even that long ago. These guys, it was totally different. Like, we're talking about like early 2000s. It wasn't like in the 70s they were doing like wacky things. Not that they were doing that wacky of things, but it was just like some of the stories I would hear was like, wow, you guys would do that stuff. But I caught the tail end of it. Then we started then the scandal happened. Then we got GPSs in our cruisers. Then the body cams came out eventually, and they started changing a lot of the policies. And it was so different than when I had graduated. Like, if you graduated and you already had to deal with all these things, they trained you in the academy and the mindset behind it. Like the new guys, they already know they're going to be GPSs. They already know they're going to be body cams and stuff like that. That's an easier transition. You don't know what it's like beforehand. And so for the guys to, they would talk about the good old days, right? Like they were just like, oh, you don't know what it's like, the good old days. And I'm like, and I'm thinking too, like, these new kids, they don't know about the good old days. Like when they weren't tracking you everywhere you go, and you weren't tracking your speeds, or if you're going to get in trouble for doing something stupid. And
the crazy thing though is the kids working today who are starting out today, who this is all normal for them. They're still going to be the 20-year-old salts or 20-year salts going, oh, you guys don't remember. There's going to be, every generation has something that they go back and go, yeah, but back when I started.
I know. It's like that ego thing about, you don't know what it's like. They would always downgrade how hard the academy was. So you guys don't know what the real academy was like. And like we had a scandal, like it was like maybe 10 years before I got on, where we had a guy that was shoving kids and heads in their toilet. I don't know if he was actually shoving them, but he was like forcing them in the academy to put their heads in the toilet. And it was like they like the trainees at the time almost didn't say anything because, you don't know what's going to happen. It was like this big whistle blew thing that happened. And that was probably one of the first big scandals we had, but that was before I got on. The academy it was brutal. Like they would say, oh, you don't know what it's like. I'm thinking, because the kids now, whereas, and we'll say this about them because they don't know what it's like, but they would give us 1 hour of personal time at the end of the evening. And we didn't actually get to use that 1 hour personal time till like week 17. So it was no real personal time. They'd be like, oh, you guys got to study, but they didn't give us any time to study. And it wasn't like we went home and we could study and get prepared for whatever. And then it would just load up. We would go home for the weekend, but then you had this paper and you had this and you had this and you had this and you had, one time they gave us an assignment. And I understand it all now. I understand the game of it. I understand the discipline of it. I understand why they did what they do. I implement some of the things that we did in the academy with my own kids. Like we did a boot camp not even that long ago because they weren't listening and this or whatever. And I'm like, all right, you guys need some consistency and some discipline. That's really important for you guys right now because it's important, when dad asks you to do something that you do it because if you're in a parking lot and you run across a parking lot, you got to be safe. And so I needed them to have that instantaneous response. But, they sent us home with a brass buckle and we had to shine this buckle so that was silver. And it was just like, this is what you're going to have me. And it took all weekend. Like it was like this, and you're just sitting there shining this thing to make it. And some guys, they shredded them apart just because their buckle wasn't shiny enough. And it was just like, oh, that's not good enough. And you gotta like go back and do it more and stuff like that. Or one of the things they did, this one broke my heart. So first week in the academy, they would give us, whatever kind of discipline. I can't remember what they called it now, but it was like you would get like a point taken off that would be applied to your grade or something like that. And so but the first week they didn't really tell us like, oh, we're going to reset this. So what they did was that we had to write to froms for, it was a gig. So every time we got gigged, we had to write a to from, you had to like explain this. But in the first week, they didn't give us computers or anything like that. So you had to write the to froms out. No big deal. You're writing out the to from. But the most difficult part about the to from is that you had to put the state seal, you had to do the letterhead, and you had to draw it on how to look like proper.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up getting like 4 or 5 gigs or something like that. And so I'm in the bathroom till 3:00 in the morning, like finishing these, because I'm like, I can't not turn these in. Like these are like, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't turn these in. And we show up in the morning. I was so proud of myself. I had my to froms done. We show up and we get in formation, and our drill instructors at the time, they collect them all. And then, like somebody, the DA calls out one of my classmates that's next to me in my platoon. He was like, hey, why didn't you complete your to froms? He's like, why did Bova over here? Why was he able to complete your to froms and you weren't? And I had like this like smile I couldn't smile, but I was smiling in my head. I'm like, yeah, I did. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he just takes all the to froms, he throws them in the air outside. The wind catches them and it takes them into the trees. And I was like, oh. I was up. And so it was like, it didn't matter. Like these guys didn't get in trouble for it. And I spent all that time making sure I got the right thing. It was like this moment. I was like, man, what the, are you kidding me? Like I was up till 3 a.m, got 2 hours of sleep that night in the middle of week 1. And you just threw all of that work into the air. Didn't even read them, nothing like that. And I was like, oh, like it was just like it was like that moment of like my heart just broke.
Could have gone the opposite way though.
Could have gone worse.
Could have pulled you out and been like, everybody else is going to PT except you. And then that would have probably hit you even worse.
You're right. Because then all eyes would have been on me and they were doing it because of me.
Yep.
Because we had, they did that all the time. We had one kid in our platoon that just, great kid now, but like, who they are in the academy and who they're on the job are usually 2 different things. But he just couldn't get it together. And he would be sitting there watching us PT for him all the time. And we were just like, we just wanted him out, like it was just like one of those, like, why? Because they really it was interesting to see how they honored, if we would come together as a team, they didn't mess with us. Because there was a moment in week 17 where we were split up into 2 different companies, and in Alpha Company, they did something and then they brought them back to day 1. And so we went into the chow hall, and
figuratively speaking, it's not like the academy starting back over, right?
No, but they day 1 them in the sense that they went back to, because there's phases that they bring you through, right? Like the first phase is like, you're all idiots. You don't know what you're doing. We're going to beat the snot out of you. And you have tunnel vision. You're like I remember being across the table on the first day against this kid, and he was trying to warn me to not do something. And I'm just thinking like, dude, like, just be quiet. Like, don't, whatever. And he ended up not being there at the end of the first week. And like, he was trying to help, like he was trying to tell me I was doing something wrong. I don't remember, but exactly what, I just remember him not being there anymore. But I didn't remember faces and names because there was so much chaos going on. But week 17, they brought Alpha Company. We were Bravo Company. I was in Bravo Company. They're Alpha Company. They bring them back to day, like phase 1. And so they're like hooting and hollering and yelling and doing all these things. And we're just sitting there quietly eating our chow, like, thank God we're not them right now. And I remember, oh man, one of my classmates, he was feeding my other classmate, like, here comes the choo-choo. And he was like taking his fork and he was feeding him. But at this point at week 17, your peripheral vision's open up. You're not in tunnel vision, which is interesting to think about. Like afterwards, like the training did work. So I could see, I knew who it was. I didn't have to like look at them. And it really did perform its duty that they were actually like setting out to do. Cause I could see incredible with my peripheral vision at that point. Cause if you're locked in and you want to know what's going on, you're paying attention over here with your peripheral vision.
And this is nothing that anybody else hasn't done. Every one of us, I bet you got to know your DIs by the sound of their footsteps. You knew you knew who was coming up behind you just by their footsteps. And you go back to carpool partners and that aspect of it. When I was in the academy, we got gig papers also. I went through the academy where everything was just handwritten. There was no computer option. But I remember having to finish up one of mine as we met in the morning, and literally on the way to the academy, I'm scrabbling out, the last 2 or 3 page paper that I had. And I still remember laughing because at the end of the academy, they came out one day and they were telling us, because a lot of it is games. A lot of it is throwing the papers in the air. It's games. Putting one troop or one, group back to day one. I bet you if you went back and reviewed the academy, they do. It's part of the games that they play. With us, they put us back in suits after we were in uniforms. But near the end of the academy, they're talking about how, we know we get these gig papers, and we could tell the ones when it was 3:00 in the morning. Like, maybe if you knew that we were writing them in the car while we were driving to the academy.
Right.
But it's depending on how you look at it. I look back at it was fun. It was an experience.
Yeah. The interesting thing was when you could really finally transition. This is just a game. Like in the beginning part, like you can't. Oh no. You can't pass. Like it's not successful. They don't give you enough time to be able to actually even succeed. But that's all the design of it. And that was helpful to kind of understand. I just needed to get. The way I would go through it was I just needed to get to the next meal. And I don't have to worry about the week. I don't have to worry about what week we're in. I just need to get to the next meal, whether it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or whatever, and then get into bed. And like that was my routine. My mindset was just like, let me just get through this chunk. And that helped because, our senior drill, he was also just one of the most creative like men to like mess with you. He created this whole
I guarantee you he didn't come up with it on his own. He was repeating a lot of the stuff.
He created new ones that they now implement. He was extra special where he's
scientist.
Yes. I mean, sure. I imagine he probably got it from other influential pieces or whatever, but we would have the gym and there was a short hill up to the dorms. And what he would do is he would have us do like, I don't know, 10 burpees or something like that. And then we'd have to take one item of clothing and go run it all the way up to our hole and put it away in the drawer. So we did like 360 burpees, ran like, I don't know, like 5-6 miles, and then putting all our, and it was like in the course of like a couple of hours. It was just like, it was one of the most insane workouts I've ever done. He was just creative with these different ideas of how to mess with us and how they would just like make it so complicated and challenging. It was like, but at the end of it all, they really built us to be bonded together. And, I still see, I think if I see one of these guys, like one of the guys, I haven't seen him since the academy, I still feel connected to him because, we went through hell together,
Now you mentioned that you got to a homicide team.
Yes.
But flip to that, was there ever a point where you thought, okay, I'm now in this, I'm a couple years in, whatever, I'm going to go retry to get on with Boston PD or did you kind of like, no, I'm here. I'm just going to ride this out for my career.
I would work a lot of details in Boston. So I would have their radio frequency on and I would hear the stuff that was going on with them. And I remember just thinking like, man, I can't believe I'm not on Boston. But, I think God kind of had his hand on me with it because I went through some pretty rough stuff like after I graduated. And I look back at Boston and being with the state, it actually was a lot. Like I had better jobs and I didn't get so burned out by the repetitive negative like pieces that would be working in the city. And I appreciate the fact that I still went with the state, but it wasn't until a little bit like afterwards that I was like, okay, like this was a good move. And, it was like a lot of prestige. I didn't really like being alone. Like I wanted to work with a partner. I wanted to be like more involved in stuff. And so that with the state, that was the only thing that was different was like, you're on your own. Like I think the first homicide I ever responded to on the road, like I didn't even have my backup that night. And that was, I was going a 30-minute response to this town in the middle of nowhere and I had no backup coming. And that was like what we were dealing with that people don't really realize for with the state, at least, I'm sure there's other parts of the country that they're doing similar things like that. But then Boston, there was things that happened on my way home that I got involved in, and you had backup like literally it's like 30 seconds away. And I worked for Boston UMass too, so I knew the system and I knew the guys in Boston PD. So it was like you'd back up like immediately, like stuff, they would be right there, and depending on how serious it was, right? So, it was just a very different. There's so many different experiences guys can have on these jobs depending on what it is, like what agency or what part of the country. It's interesting.
Every time I have some of these conversations, I get little memories of doing the job. And you mentioned, backup right away. And the thing that comes to my mind right now is you'd be working at, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody out and about, and you call for a back and you can hear them coming.
Yeah.
Even to the point where the person you're dealing with looks up at you and go like, oh, you got people coming, because they're, you hear them coming off the red lights hard, coming off the stop signs hard. You know who's coming, and they're just those little things like that are. I miss that a little bit.
Yeah.
Were there task forces or anything that you could have done where, as a state trooper, been assigned to a multi-agency team like in the city of Boston?
Yeah, there was definitely there was the organized crime unit. There was the bank robbery task force. There was a DEA task force. We had access to a lot of different like organizations, and because Boston's a pretty big hub, and there was definitely a lot of opportunities that you could do a lot of different things. And I think that was a lot of reason why a lot of people wanted, because you could fly helicopters. Like you could apply for the air wing, and then they would bring you on as a TFO, and then they would actually put you through flight school, and then you could be like, it wasn't just a pilot and then a trooper, like you became a pilot, and they would train you to do that. And so we had like a couple of aircraft. So there's so many different things you could do. We had boats, and we had, I worked in the Belchertown Barracks a little while. So there was the Quabbin Reservoir, which basically it provides all the water for Boston. And so we had boats on the Quabbin that we would patrol. And there's like literally nobody on there, but like that was, we had all of these different, they had ATVs for that. They had all different things that you could do. And depending on which barracks you were in, you might have access to some of those things. There was very few, and then each barracks was really different, because if you went to one barracks that was predominantly highway, it would do a lot of crashes. They're more in the city, and they were doing more of that stuff. And then you would have really rural barracks doing completely, like the guys in the east and the guys in the west do completely different stuff. And so they were covering more town calls, and they were doing more domestics, and they were doing this or that. And they weren't doing tickets. They weren't doing highway because they didn't have any highway. And so it was just, there's so many different things that we could do depending on where you were. And then, it was like, depending on your rabbi, I think they've kind of walked away a little bit from that, but if you had a good connection, you could get into one of these cool units, and you could, they had guys doing supply, they had guys doing fleet, and, those were kind of more cushy jobs where you worked Monday through Friday and you weren't really doing anything other than that supply chain thing and making sure things were dialed in. But that's how the contract was. It was like, you can't take these jobs away. They did a pretty good job with that.
I think about the concept of this podcast and transitioning, though, and you wonder, some of those guys working those admin supply chain spots, how much they're setting themselves up for a post-law enforcement career, that the guy writing 40 tickets a day out on the highway, there's no market for them after that.
No, there really isn't. And I was pretty mindful of that, because I was able to get in the DA's office, do homicide investigations. And I just wanted to progress. I wanted training. I wanted something. And so I ended up getting, my CO at the time, he got me into training for like cell phone, forensics and stuff like that. And so I got involved with Cellbrite, and I got involved with Cellhawk and doing like triangulations and stuff like that. And so I was getting those technical skills, and then going to conferences and making connections with these companies, thinking like, okay, long-term, when I retire, then now maybe I'll move into that, because most of these guys didn't have that mindset of like, okay, what can I get from the job that's going to benefit me long-term, where I can grow and expand myself. And I always had that in the background, where I was like, okay, well, once I was, past the point of like, all right, this is cool that I'm on, what's next? And what are we doing to, because once it was interesting, because once we graduated, like the in-service wasn't like as intense as I expected it. It wasn't like all of a sudden we were going to be, I thought we'd probably have a lot more in-service training, more like similar to UMass, but we didn't actually have that.
Costs money to train
I know.
I don't know how big the organization is, but I'm guessing in the 5,000 to 6,000 range.
Oh, last it was like 2,000.
Still, it's a big chunk of money to put all those people through training.
Yeah. It was interesting because it was just, the defensive tactics stuff that we did. We never really like revisited all the stuff that we did. And it's just like, how am I, it's a perishable skill. So, unless you were doing it yourself, which took time. And if you're commuting and you're working details, like these guys don't have time to do this stuff. And so they would get overweight and they would, start to degrade over time. And it was just like, well, how many details can I do? And then for out east, those guys had to work details to keep their house. It wasn't even a matter of like, oh, I'm just doing this extra. People didn't realize like you're out east, like the housing costs were so much more expensive. Those guys had to do 2 to 3 details a week in order to actually make ends meet because, I don't know if they bought outside their means or whatever, but it was just a lot more expensive out there.
Let's jump ahead then. You ultimately did 10 years total ish. You're now retired. What prompted the retirement?
I got injured. So I've had a couple injuries throughout my career. I had shoulder surgery that put me out for a little while. I had to have a couple surgeries on that. And then I ended up breaking my foot at the academy in one of these in-services we were talking about when they started to increase the DT stuff, because they started to increase that training. And I ended up breaking my foot and having 3 pins in it. And so, it wasn't just, it seems like just the time to go. I always struggled recovering from injuries, and I almost had to retire my shoulder when I first had gotten that, but I was able to come back. And I didn't realize how detrimental breaking my foot was going to be to my entire body, and how it was going to, cause like hip issues, and it was going to cause a weakness in the left side of my leg. And so that was a huge, obviously a huge component to not feeling adequate to be able to step into the physical piece of it, because
no pun intended, right?
Right. But people don't realize too the cost of wearing the uniform. Like we looked like we were going to invade Poland. So we have boots up to our knees, and we got the big hat, and we got like all this stuff.
You have that also? Because I remember going to into Providence Airport one time and seeing one of the Rhode Island State Trooper. And the one thing I thought to myself is, you lace up those damn boots every time you get on duty.
So that academy for Rhode Island was probably, I had my DI, my platoon lead DI, and then one of my classmates came from Rhode Island. And so their academy is similar to ours, except there's only 30 guys in the academy with like 6 DIs. So like their attrition rate was like 50% because there's all eyes are on them. And so everybody got it as if they were like the worst in the academy the entire time. And so I remember them talking about the Rhode Island State Police Academy, and it was just like brutal. Like that was just like probably one of the most brutal in the whole country. But yeah, they because they didn't even have really badges. They had like little numbers and stuff like that. And I think we had the same company that we used for our boots, but we used black boots. They had brown boots. All their leather gear was brown. They have like black and red, and it's a little bit different of a style uniform, but they had,
to me, I thought Canadian Mountie.
Yeah, very similar to that. And we would go and I would go to a lot of funerals. So we would see all these guys, and like everybody's, dressed to the nines in their class A's and stuff like that. And, you see the difference in how people would march and, their different uniforms and stuff like that. And, we would always be in line with Rhode Island because they were always very squared away, those guys.
So is that still the uniform today in Massachusetts?
It is. We were starting to transition to more of a more modern uniform, but then there was, guys would do things like they wouldn't wear the vest thing, the uniform vest that was like more, had like the uniform pockets and stuff like that. And so, the brass got a little upset and they're like, oh, we're going back. And so then we're just, we're our own worst enemies. Like we'll always screw it up. Like we'll be given a little slack, and then there's one guy, he screws it up for everybody. And that's just like,
not just, cops.
It's the nature of the beast. It's like it's good, enjoy it while it's still there, and then it could be taken away, and that's just part of it.
How long does it take to break in those boots to where they're comfortable?
Those were actually not terrible. The ones we got, they actually spent a little bit more money on, and mine were because they were custom fit, and I have massive calves. And so my calves would just like totally shoot out of those boots. And I'd be standing next to like maybe a classmate or something. He's got like sticks for legs. And like, I remember I'd be sitting in court all the time. Like, cause it just totally magnified my calves. And they were like, what, like you have huge calves. And I was like, yeah, I love these boots. It's just like, it just looked like I'm short, but I was like, it made the short okay. It was just, but those boots, they got really comfortable. Actually, I actually preferred them over the summer boots, because we would switch uniforms, and the summer boots were a little bit rougher, and you'd break them in more frequently because those boots, like you only get a couple of the tall boots a year or throughout your career, really.
So after you broke your foot, how long into the process was there the kind of light bulb moment where like, all right, my career's done? And started thinking about making my transition out?
I think it was probably about 6 to 8 months afterwards, just realizing things weren't getting better. Just the swelling, and I wasn't super upset about it in the sense that my life is going to be over. Cause I didn't appreciate like how the negativity had been going downhill at that point. And there was a lot of micromanaging that was happening, and a lot of, I don't really like to talk negative about the job, but just like how there's these older guys in charge, like getting, like they're disciplining us for things that they did with punity prior to that. And there was like this no understanding, like they would get promoted and it didn't even matter. They didn't remember the job. And so it was like this thing where things were just getting worse and worse and worse. And I was just like, this isn't really what I signed up for. There, was constant fear over, well, hey, don't do this so that you don't lose your retirement. And that, it took a toll. And just like, after my first surgery, I like kind of had this big shift where I started to see things a little bit differently, and I started to open up my mind to, what life could be outside of the job. Cause we talked about it earlier. I spent 10 years trying to get this career, and then I'm like, I just did it for 10 years in the full-time capacity in the state. And when I went out for that surgery, like it felt like everything kind of shifted for me in terms of how I saw the world, and my perspective started to open up, and what I wanted to do, what was going to be impactful and meaningful for me. And I did the job really well. I enjoyed the job, but I was like, I can make a bigger impact outside of this job as well. And that this didn't have to be the thing. Cause I know a lot of guys that after they retire, like they'll have a heart attack, or they won't find meaning and purpose afterwards. And then all of a sudden, even though they complained about it for the decades they were in it, then all of a sudden they retire, and then the job's gone. And then all of a sudden it's just like lights out. And, I didn't want that to be me, even though I worked so hard to get there. That was, and so it just feels what the path is. Cause, we didn't really talk about the things that happened in between, but I went through a really arduous divorce and a lot of personal issues where my personal life was actually the thing that was more painful and more difficult while I was on the job than the job itself. And that was the thing that kind of.
What aspects of the personal side of your life?
So we kind of talked about earlier, like I had, my dad was in the Navigators, and I grew up in the church, and my parents were high school sweethearts and stuff like that. And so I had lived in this really religious mindset for a long period of time. That's how I got married. And that's how, I made a lot of decisions prior up to that point. And so my life was very much reflective of, I wanted people to see me in a very positive light. I was a good boy. I did the right thing. I'm telling you, like, I was super honest on my background investigations, and I wanted to be living in a light of integrity. And so I ended up kind of following that path in the church, where I was like, get married, have kids, life will feel complete. And then I spent 10 years getting onto this job that I dreamed of. And I was like, this is going to be it. And then I get on it. And then a year later, I'm like, I spent 10 years for this, this was it. I thought this was going to feel different. And so I ended up making some really poor choices because my marriage wasn't great at the time. And it wasn't anything I expected it. And I ended up leaving my wife for another woman, and she ended up getting pregnant like immediately. And it just enslaved my friends, my family, and it brought me into this like deep depression point where, it was a point where I was on the job sitting in my cruiser on a shift, like my firearm out, like contemplating, do I not be here anymore? Cause this was like so painful, and the shame and the guilt and all of those components. And that was, I had worked so hard to get to that point, and then I started making these really poor choices along the way. And I look back at them now, and I'm actually really grateful for them, because, the marriage I was in wasn't good for me, and how I was seeing Christianity at the time was not good for me. It was very about this like guilt and shame and living in the trying to make things black and white. Like, am I good or am I bad? And so I went through this period of time that was like really dark for about 2 years, hiding, not wanting to talk about it, not really being social. And funny enough, like, I didn't actually want to become a homicide detective either, but that was at that time, because I was going through those transitions, I needed the schedule for my kids. And so I ended up applying, because I was like, we talked about the dyslexia. I didn't want to do paperwork, and that's a lot of paperwork, but the need for the schedule was so high. I was like, all right, I'm going to apply. And, ended up loving that part. But it was like this point in my journey, it was super dark. And then I was doing this other dark work. That was the moment for me where I started to awaken to something different. I actually went to a Tony Robbins seminar in the middle of all of this. And it was the first point in my story where I was like, oh, I can change the narrative of this. I don't have this, like, my life isn't ruined. I don't need to not be here anymore. And, I'm really grateful for my kids, because I think I tell them that they saved me, because without them, I don't know if I would have been there. Like, I don't know if I would have made that same choice to not be here. And then going to that seminar, like, was the first time I was like, oh, I actually have control over my mindset, and I have control over the story I tell myself. And I had been living up to that point, all of this sin and all this darkness, and like, don't be a bad boy. And then that moment shifted me into, growing like in this personal development world of like, hey, I need to grow myself, and I need to expand. I need to start thinking differently. Cause up until that point, it was like 10 to 12 years of thinking like the mindset that most cops get in. And, we're dealing with really negative, dark things all the time. And, it's like us against the world. And up until that point, I wasn't really thinking that way, because I was so embedded in wanting to become a police officer that afterwards I started to think differently. I was like, oh, okay. This doesn't have to be the thing that destroys me. And it actually ended up being the thing that projected me forward. It was the thing that allowed me to overcome fear and shame and really elevate myself to a point where, oh, I actually appreciate who I am. I think I actually have a purpose here and meaning much bigger than just being a police officer, like where I can, I'm dealing with suicides all the time. And so I can relate differently with people, with what they were experiencing, and then bring that into other areas where guys are struggling now, where they're dealing with, wreckages in their marriages, or the thing that that most of society doesn't understand about law enforcement is, we could talk about the divorce rate and how much higher for cops, but people don't really understand, like they separate us from human and how much it does take a toll on guys that don't have the right mindset or the right resources to start figuring out what is it that I'm going to do with my life that's going to bring deep fulfillment. How am I going to do this in a way that I make better choices? I've made the decision like about around 3 years ago. I had some wine in France when I was there, but 3 years ago I quit drinking. Really, when we were in France, I was like, I don't like this anymore, to be honest. And so I don't drink. And it's just like, most guys need the alcohol to get past.
Were you drinking a lot before you stopped?
I didn't drink a lot before I got on the job, but then after I left and after my life like completely erupted, I was drinking a lot. I was drinking significantly. I ended up putting on probably 30 pounds, and it was a really, really dark season for me. And I think I had a couple of relationships that went back and forth throughout that time, and I was just drinking a lot, probably 4 or 5 nights a week.
I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to take you back to that day, that evening, whatever it was, sitting in your cruiser with your handgun out. Mm. What pulled you out of it?
My kids.
And was it that the only time it got that close?
Yes. I mean, that was the only time where, I had it out and I was looking at it and I was thinking this might be the better decision. I think during that, I was in such a deep depression during that time that, I would have, I think there was a lot of moments like I would say, I can't do this anymore. Like it was too much. I was like, the decisions I made were just too much on me. And I had to carry the weight of the decisions I had made. Cause up to that point, it was like, it wasn't like anybody had seen it coming. Nobody saw it coming. And I didn't see it coming. It wasn't like nobody would have ever predicted it was me. I wasn't running around on her. It wasn't like I was that guy that was doing those things. No judgment to those guys. Like I don't have a lot of judgment towards things that we do as men. I think there's a lot of, or women, but there's a lot of stuff that we carry, and we do a lot of subconscious things to try to make ourselves feel better without realizing what that's doing to us. But that was the only moment where, I don't think a lot of, I don't share that a lot. Like, I think it was only recently I kind of told my kids, like, I was thankful for them because that's why Dad's still here. Because I knew it was something that was so important to talk about. I needed to prep them so that they could, if they heard about it, they weren't like surprised by it. But, that was a big moment.
And I definitely don't want to underplay it, but where I want to go with it is to get to that point, sitting there that day, contemplating it, handgun in your hand, to then going, nope, I'm not going to do this. Where do you go? I'm literally talking the rest of that day, the next 2 or 3 days, from a headspace. Where do you go? And is it something where you think back to it and go, man, I got there? Or was it literally turning that figurative corner and going, that's not what's going to happen in my life. I'm doing this.
Yeah, it wasn't that quick. I think when I'm thinking about it now, I actually probably haven't really thought much about that specific. Like, I remember the moment after, like, I'm not doing this for my kids because I couldn't do this to them. But I think what I started to imagine was like them finding my body, and then what that looked like, and then what everybody else had to deal with afterwards. And that, I was in the middle of nowhere, parked off the street, and I was, just in my cruiser and just thinking about all of the darkness I was going to bring on to that, and having, just being found. Because we'd had, a couple of suicides while I was on the job from guys, and, it's heart-wrenching. And we'd had in the line of duty deaths, but then those deaths are just, we had a fairly decent like employee assistant unit that they would check up on guys and stuff like that. And I was working with somebody at the time because I was in the middle of my divorce, and they gotten wind of it because, I'd mentioned that, I'd left my wife for another woman. Well, the other woman had a husband, and that was, he was not too thrilled about that, rightfully so. And so he ended up reporting something to my internal affairs, and then, I was in part of an investigation. So they kind of found out what was going on with me, and they hooked me up with employee assistant unit. And I still remember, he was a great guy, Matt. He really, really kind of helped me a bit through that process. But it was, that was.
So you were already talking to somebody.
Yeah.
At that point. I guess in my mind where I'm going, and for somebody who might have gotten to that same point or is contemplating it, there's the one thing to have the self-conversation. Hey, I don't want my kids to find out about this. I don't want my partners or somebody else to have. There's that whole aspect of it. But then you have to continue with your life the next day, the next week, the next month. Where I want to take it is, what did you put in your life that was different from that moment going forward? And how resolved were you about doing it? Was it something where you're like, okay, here's what I got to do different? Or was it talking to somebody and then them telling you like, hey, maybe you should think about A, B, or C? You see what I'm saying?
I didn't tell anybody about that moment. I really, it was only recently I started talking about that. Because I didn't realize there's a whole shame aspect to it too.
Correct.
Right? Like being able to share that level of vulnerability. Like I wasn't strong enough at the moment to carry my choices up to that point, and then I was going to be cowardly out, and I was going to leave my kids with a horrible story, and but then I recognized the power of being able to share that for other people that are going through that, because they're not going to talk about it, right? Because I didn't talk about it, and I didn't tell anybody about it. I was going to therapy too at the time, actually, because as soon as I left, I was like, I need somebody to talk to. It was the first time I started talking about stuff. And it wasn't, it wasn't very long after.
Or what was the biggest change in your life after that you, from a positive aspect, that you remember?
I needed to do something different. And then that's when, I was able to go to Tony Robbins, and that event, it was 2 events actually. It was one event, it was a weekend event, and then it was a week-long event about a month later. And I actually, you know what, Paul, as I'm thinking back, it was, I just started to recognize I needed something else.
Okay.
Because as I'm thinking about it, I was starting to explore other men's groups, or I was like, I need something. And it wasn't all of a sudden I just went to Tony Robbins. It was my parents actually, I had moved out of my apartment in Boston after I left, but then I was in with a friend, and he ended up not being such a great friend afterwards. And I had to move into my parents. And so God bless my parents, man. They saw me go through the worst parts of my life, and they came up to me one day, and my dad was like, hey, I think, I know you're trying to find something that's going to help, and I think I found something for you. Would you be interested in coming and checking this out? And he told me about, I didn't know who Tony Robbins was at the time. He's like, yeah, he's got this Netflix special. You should take a look. I think he's got an event coming up. And I was like, all right, I'll take a look. And I looked into it, and I was like, I can't afford this right now. I was like, I think it was, I don't know, it was like $8,000 or something like that. And I'll never forget. He looked at me, and he says, I would pay 10 times the amount if it's gonna help you. Because they just, I didn't talk to them about this stuff, but they could just feel it. My dad, when I left my ex-wife, I kind of disappeared for a couple of weeks and didn't really talk to anybody. My dad he told me later, it was like, I felt like the prodigal son. He was like, he had to take 3 weeks off of work, and he was sitting at his window just waiting for me to come home. And, that was, I think, guys that are going through this now, being able to, even if you can't talk about it, to be able to be around people that care about you and support you and see you outside of the uniform, outside of that badge. because, I constantly think about how, we're just a number when it comes to the badge. Like, they don't care at the end of the day. Like, they'll do employee assistance. They'll be good leaders inside that will care about you, that are human connection. But the actual job, at the end of the day, you're there for a reason. You're a tool. And you have to have a purpose outside of this job in order to like survive it. Because if this is the only thing that's going to serve you, then it's going to let you down at the end of it. Because even if you didn't have that aha moment I did a year after I'm in, and you get to the end of it, then you're not going to recognize how impactful that's going to be for you. Because even for me, I've done a lot of work on myself to get to my mind to a certain place with this. But this job, like, I still feel like how I'm not going to be a police officer any longer. Like, I'll be retired and still have a badge and stuff, but I don't have the same, it's not the same weight of like purpose, right? Like there was so much purpose behind what I was doing, and to be able to have a stature, to be able to handle the types of complex things I was doing was very significant. It had a lot of value to my life. And so, like, to think about that being a part of my journey for over 20 years and then not being that any longer, that weighs on me too. Cause I'm like, I'm going to miss the fun stuff. Cause like, there's a lot of excitement in the uncertainty of the job, and being able to go and, do good work and find bad guys and put them away. And, one of my favorite parts was just like, I was around a lot of good guys and had a lot of good relationships where it was fun. Like we'd joke around like people don't understand.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately because there is that dichotomy. I am one to a broken record. Like you said, don't make the badge in the uniform your entire life. Have your own identity away from that, because there is going to be a time that you're going to need to take that uniform off for the last time and hang it up, and you need to be able to move forward. There's also something about why you were drawn to these careers, whether it be a military member or a first responder. There's something inside of us that is drawn to it. And for the civilian sector, to never truly understand that look in that person's face. I'm sure there are soldiers, Marines who have been deployed and they've gone into a town, a village or whatever, and they've encountered people. I don't even care if there's a language barrier. There's a look on their face that says, thank you, I'm glad you're here. You're going to fix the situation. You've gone to a call. Somebody's come to that front door, wherever, and there's that look on their face and they don't have to say anything at all. I'm glad you're here. You're not going to be able to replace that once you step away from these careers. There is going to be something that is going to be missing for the remainder of your life. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I would always tell people, like, you can't even pay. Like, I don't care how much money you have. You can't pay for the seats I get. Like I was working homicide. There was. You look at percentages of careers and what people do. We were rarer than doctors. Like there was only 15 of us for 2 counties. There was only 15 of us in these 2 counties, and then we are the only ones that have the seats that we have. And you if you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to do something different, you want to do a different career, you want to be a doctor, you want to do, you have to work hard you can't pay for these seats. Like there's no, like, people, sometimes it's the greatest front row seats to the most exciting things you get to see in life. And you really get to experience, like, the good, the bad, the dark pieces of humanity. And that, like, that's the experience I got, was like, you can't pay for this. Like, I get to do something that nobody else gets to do. And that was exciting. It provided me a lot of fulfillment for different pieces of, like, what I wanted. Like, I was significant in that role. People, like, as I progressed in the office and got more seniority, like, I knew more of the local guys. Like, I was commanding that whole scene. So there's like people looked up to me. And then there was that whole component of the uncertainty. I didn't know what that day was going to bring. And that, we haven't talked about any stories, which is okay. And I don't know if we will, but the things I've seen, there's people they can't even comprehend what I've seen, because I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people that have died. I've seen really tragic situations. I've seen things happen with kids. I've seen all different kinds of major crimes and rapes and different stuff. And like, how do you still have an outlook that humanity has good in them after you experience all those things? Because a lot of guys, they'll go down that path and they'll just see the darkness and not believe anything is still good, because they get stuck in that mind of,
when you look forward to that first cup of coffee, as soon as that morning alarm goes off, then Blue Line Roasting is the choice for you. They're a Tennessee-based law enforcement-owned company. They're roasting small batches of premium coffee, fresh, within 48 hours of your ordering, and ship fast so it doesn't sit around getting stale. From Patriot, their light roast, to Failure Drill, their dark roast. They've got something that fits whatever you prefer. Whole bean or ground, it's your call. But Blue Line Roasting is more than just good coffee. A portion of every purchase goes to support law enforcement families who are dealing with line of duty injury or loss. So your morning routine becomes something bigger. Great coffee and real impact. Grab a single bag, try a sampler, or set up a subscription so you're never caught without it. Shipping is always free. And for the listeners of this podcast, use the promo code TRANSITION10 to get 10% off your order. Head on over to bluelineroasting.com and make your morning count.
The cynicalness. And then that penetrates everything else in them. And for me, I was fortunate. Like I see what happened with me as a fortunate thing, because I turned the dial, and I never saw the stuff I experienced as the thing that was like, I was taking that on subconsciously or whatever, in a way that I was like, oh, like I can't handle this. This is too much for me, or it was bringing me down a more negative path. I would always have a very positive mindset, even through it all, because I would see the good pieces inside of it, where I appreciated that I got to arrive on scene. Because at one point I saw a detective notify a family member of their dead brother in a way where I was like, I would be mortified if that was me on the other end. And that people were fortunate to have me arrive, because I would be there for them in a way that was a little bit different, because I wasn't so negative in how I saw things, and I just wrote them off of me. And obviously there's that little separation you have to have in order to like separate what's actually happening, but being able to have the ability to be compassionate with them and actually really show up for them in one of probably the most difficult times, and then still do the job and not take all of that on as this cynical nature of it, which, and there's so many good guys on the job. Like the more guys that can continue to do that, I think there's been like kind of a turn with the mental health of law enforcement. They were doing some programs before I was gone that you could go and do some mental health stuff. And there's places en masse where they have like a retreat center up in Maine and stuff like that guys get to go to, and they can do some stuff on their nervous system and regulate their mindset and figure those things out. But it's the gratitude, I think the hardest thing for us is like, you see that we get to see that look that we were talking about, but after that look is gone, it's like it disappears, and people don't really give you the credit you feel like you're deserved through those moments, because they don't understand how complicated it gets to see all those dark things. Unless you can actually really step away from that mindset, you can have more of a bird's eye view of like, oh, well, this is just a job. Because when it becomes your only purpose, then you want more from it than it's really going to give you.
Well, that's the pizza pie that's sliced into 16 slices. And what I mean by that is doing the job has so many pieces to it. At the end of the day, that 3-number thing on their phone, most people are calling it at the worst day of their life.
Right.
That's all you get to experience of their life. Sometimes you make it better. Sometimes you make it worse. At the end of the day, though, you're there to at least just try to address the situation. The other people who are seeing what you're doing, they're potentially seeing it from a negative perspective. You wrote me a ticket, you took me to jail, whatever it is. So their whole image of you is negative. Mm-hmm. And every time they talk about, they're not talking about you. They didn't talk about Tony. They talked about the guy that was in the uniform. But everybody they talked to, man, that state trooper was an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another piece of the pie that comes, you're sitting in the center, and these are all the pieces that are coming, that are making you and your career. And if you compound that, there is a portion of the job where everybody's an Adam Henry. Okay.
It's like any job.
Is it just a figure of speech? Yes. Some people are more Adam Henrys than others. But when you carry that over into your personal life and you start thinking that everybody you deal with is an Adam Henry, that's where it starts becoming toxic. Mm-hmm. That's where there is no line between you in the uniform and you out of the uniform.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be driven home from the day you start in these careers, is that remember who you are, the person who walked through the door with none of this experience, and try to hold on to that person as much as you possibly can. Because this is going to be a small blip in your life. And there are people in your life that are going to be with you long after this career. And you don't want to be the guy who has a heart attack 2 or 3 years afterwards because you have absolutely nothing in your life.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. As I started young in some ways. Like, I mean, most guys.
No, you didn't.
But, yeah. But like, at 18 or at 20, that I didn't know any different. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know what purpose and having stuff outside of that would actually look like, in that there's like these deeper meaningful pieces where I wasn't really getting from the church what I think was told to me I was going to get. And, I think, we're meant to give back in humanity. And how do we do that in a way that doesn't tie directly to this, so that we can actually have some separation from it, where we have a practice outside of this that can actually be helpful, or be mindful of, what's happening, what's the story we're telling ourselves in our minds. Because I remember, before I left my ex-wife, like the story that was running in my mind is, I'm a state trooper, man. I could, like, there's so many guys that do this is fine. This is okay. This is going to be okay. And like, that was like, the ego in me at that point was just because I was elevated so much from the academy, and they were like, oh, you guys are graduated and this and that. And you went through one of the most difficult academies. It's the story that we tell ourselves in our mind that is going to dictate, how we actually perceive and receive our life, and the people that come into it, and how we relate to them. And it wasn't until I really took responsibility for the fact that, like, everything that happens in my life that's my responsibility. Regardless if it's somebody else's fault or they betray me, I still there's some level of responsibility for me to be able to carry in that. Whether it's like I said yes too many times to this and I allowed them to, break a boundary or this or that. Like, I get to carry the responsibility of that, because what it does is it doesn't allow them to control me anymore. I can't say to them, hey, you know what? You're the reason why this happened to me. I can own all the pieces, and then it gives me the freedom. And that's like the biggest piece for me that I've been able to take out of all of the hard years. Because it wasn't until really recently, like in the last couple of years, I really started to feel out of that cloud of that story, where I could shift into something different and really experience what I think that most guys would really like to experience in life.
An odd way to put this, and matter of fact, I just had a conversation with somebody last night about it. The greater majority of men and women who come to these careers bring trauma and baggage. But it doesn't sound like you really had that experience. It sounds like you had a really good childhood, a family that was very loving, very caring, no real drama. It doesn't sound like. Sounds like religion was a big part of your life. Mm-hmm. The odd question I have, do you think not having any trauma, not having any real exposure to what is considered bad made what you experienced once you got, it's one thing to want to do something. Hey, I want to be a race car driver. There's another thing to getting to it and now being strapped into, oh, wait a minute, I got to drive 160 miles an hour. Hey, I think I want to be a cop. But then there's another thing to, all right, I'm going to put the uniform on. I'm going to go get in this cruiser and I'm going to go be a cop. And now I've got to see the bad side of humanity.
I think there was a piece of me, especially like right before I left, I was super naive to certain things, especially in my personal life. I never saw the bad pieces as bad things. It was just like, I got to be a good guy in it. And, I think trauma or whatever we experience when we're younger is all relative. Mm-hmm. I think it's a matter of like, part of my journey was like going back into the things that happened to me when I was younger, that, I did have a great childhood. It wasn't like my dad was there, my mom was there, they loved me, they cared about me. Could they have done things different? Sure, every parent could do that. I could do a lot of things different for my kids. But at, those pieces around the dyslexia we talked about, like I was such a people pleaser back then. And the shame that I realized how much shame I carried when I was younger and how that affected the decisions I made and why I things happened throughout my life. Because I'm not like, oh, Paul, like, I wish this never happened to me. I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful it happened because it awoke me to something. And so I get to carry the gratitude for that differently, where I think no matter what somebody's gone through in their childhood and their story and what they grew up in, that they get to, it's amazing that people want to protect and serve, right? And it's just, sometimes it gets clouded through a filter. And then because of that, the subconscious kind of plays them into, they're the victim of all these things. And then they start going down that, I keep talking about the story, but they keep running that story. And then that's the thing that dictates what their outcome is. And, I in some ways it was almost more devastating for me because my childhood was so, like, the standard and expectations I had for myself were so high. Like my parents were high school sweethearts. They didn't have sex until they were married. Like, that was a high standard to me. And I didn't meet that standard. And then I felt shame. And then from 19 to 25, I didn't have sex with anybody until I got married, and I didn't have sex until I got married. And then people are like, what the hell did you do that for? And then afterwards I'm thinking, damn, why did I do that? And then I'm like, all right, well, now I'm married and you can't get divorced and all these things. And so you get stuck into these rooted patterns. And so it doesn't, it's all relative, I think that there was a piece of me, because I was so shy as a boy and I was so insecure about my dyslexia. When I put the uniform on, was like the first time I felt empowered to be something significant. And I didn't have that through school, where I was kind of the black sheep, and I wasn't I was popular senior year. That was like the year I was pretty decent in school, but up until that point, it was pretty lonely. And so when you put that uniform on and then you bond with these other people and you're on this common mission, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. This feels good. Like I was never really driven by money. Like money wasn't like, I never thought, oh, I need to make millions and millions of dollars. I was driven by the significance of it.
Before we get into what you've started building for your post law enforcement career, my one last question though, if you hadn't broken your foot, you think you'd have finished out your career?
I don't know. I think it was just kind of the universe's way of directing me in a different path.
You're not going to make this decision. I'm going to make it for you.
Yeah. I don't think so. My girlfriend, we've been together for a couple of years now, but when we first met, I was like, yeah, I only got 10 years left. She's like, you got 10 years? That's like a lifetime. And I was like, well, what do you mean? It's just 10 years. Like, but I think think it was just this, it's kind of like this, a blessing where it's like, I didn't have to pull the trigger. And then now I'm getting pulled in a direction, a trajectory that feels more in line with what I'm offering now in terms of the purpose and the gifts I get to give. Because it was, it takes a very unique individual to do homicide investigations, be a police officer, but the stuff I'm moving into now, I feel a deeper sense of purpose, and that there's even fewer people that can do what I'm doing or be, vulnerable to be talking on camera right now about like that moment in the car with my gun out, and then tell you how grateful I am for it. There's very few people that are willing to do that. And because there's a cost to it too. The vulnerability of it is like, all right, it's not even just like a regular job, like the scrutiny in which we are held to as police officers is even heavier. Like we're supposed to be the ones that are strong and protecting everybody else. To be able to share that level of vulnerability is, that's very difficult because we need to be strong. And that, now I'm, seeing a light of purpose in this other area that I'm moving towards, that it's just going to have a bigger impact because other people can do that job.
So 2 angles that I want to go on, what you're going to be doing moving forward and your podcast.
Yeah.
So which do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about what I'm doing.
So how did the idea come about and what are you going to be doing?
So right now, I've been mentoring like high level men, leaders, entrepreneurs, guys, veterans. We don't have what
was the catalyst to draw you into that space?
The catalyst of that was a breakup I went through about 3 years ago. So I kind of mentioned I quit drinking, and the trajectory of my story in my life was filled with these relationship patterns that were showing up constantly, where my marriage was not like, there was really arduous pieces to that were not really healthy or helpful, but it wasn't as toxic as the relationships I've got into afterwards. So it was like, you went cold to hot, and it was like a big extreme from the two of them. And I didn't understand why I kept making those decisions over and over again, dating the women that I dated, because, we learn in the academy, booze, bucks and broads are the things that are going to get us in trouble. Right. So after I'd just been like kind of emotionally ruined over and over again, I went and got some mentors that were really kind of, they kind of helped me understand men and women differently, where, I think society wants to tell us we're all the same. And I started to really understand, okay, I get to honor the fact that I'm masculine, a man, and I have different hormones than women, and started into putting these pieces together, and it started to help me figure out my relationships. And then when I started to do that, I started to see other pieces of what my gifts were, being able to connect with people and have a view of being able, like what I was doing in Homicide, being able to separate my emotions from what's going on for them, being very empathetic and being able to help them see the blind spots. And so like they're, living in guilt and shame or frustration, or, how do I come out of that? And, there's a lot of, a certain type of police officer that would do really well with that. But it's we get rooted in these stories of everybody else is against us. And so now the work was, I came out of that victim mindset, and it was like a hockey puck. It was just like, or a hockey stick. I just shot up in my personal growth where, like I'm talking about, like I own the responsibility of all the pieces of my life. That took a long time, like almost a decade, to like the 7 or 8, I guess almost 9 years at this point of working through that story to be here now where I'm like, hey, like I can own all these pieces. And that, once I started to see I had an ability to articulate that and help give tools to other men, I was like, oh, this is it. And I started to see people that I was working with kind of more on more like on a side. It was just more of a hobby. Like it wasn't a hobby, but it was like I had relationships and I was kind of mentoring some other guys. One of my buddies that was, you know, in the state police as well. Some other guys that I was really close with, and you know, I liked and cared about, and saw their lives getting better because of the stuff I was sharing with them. And so I started to see how that impact was starting to change, not just my life, but their lives, my parents' lives, my kids' lives, the mother of my children's lives, because that's a whole complicated mess, because I don't just have one ex-wife, I have two exes that with kids, and they're complicated. I got to deal with all kinds of, it's not like all of a sudden we're not together anymore and they're easy. That's not it. But being able to handle such complex pieces and then being able to bring that to other people's lives, especially men. And that's really specific. I'm working with guys that they want it so badly to be able, because they know that there's something more on the other side of it. And, when I started to see the impact that was making, that was where I was like, okay, there's something here. And that was, a couple of years ago. And then I started with the coaches I was working with. They were helping me, and they invited me to come in and start helping with them because they saw me like expanding and actually being able to provide value to their other clients. And then that's when I started to transition. I'm going to go do this on my own.
So was that the progression in the sense that you realized you were at a point in your life that I need a mentor, I need a coach? You got to working with them, and then it was from the work with them that you went then, all right, I feel that I've got something that I can give to somebody else. Is that the progression of it?
Yeah. I think, I think oftentimes we think I can do this on my own. But if you want to go fast, you want to move like forward quickly, like you can't do it alone. And you got to get an example of somebody that has already done what they've done. And, I kind of skate the line with I think therapy's great. I think people should, there's really good therapists, but for me, I needed somebody very specifically that had been where I had been and knew what I went through and had made it on the other side of it. And so that was what my mentor was to me, was he had been through a divorce and chaos, and he gave me tips and things like that. And then, getting other tools I wasn't aware of that I needed to work on to help me completely reprogram everything. And that was, that period of time, there was a 3-month window, like after this breakup, after everything happened, that was pivotal. It was like, I did 10 years of growth in 3 months. And without them there, I don't know if I would have fallen back into the old subconscious pattern of it. And so like that was, I told you about the Tony Robbins event. That was huge because it was the first time I realized I was in charge of the story. I didn't have to be a victim to it, but I didn't have the tools I needed in order to actually make that like true right then and there. And it wasn't until I went through more seasons of chaos and all different kinds of like moments of like, man, this sucks, to finally just having enough of it, being like, I can't do this anymore. And then finally getting help to, people that actually knew what they were doing. And so once I started to see that there's a lot of good stuff out there, but then there's also a lot of nonsense. And so then when I saw that, and that we had something unique to give back, especially to men, because I feel like women get a lot more attention with that, which is okay. No judgment towards that. But there's something really unique that men aren't getting right now that doesn't fall in line with, we're all just humans. And so like, that was the thing for me that was like, okay, this is important and we need to provide this, and we can provide this. And, seeing that, just be revalidated over and over again by actually people coming in and seeing how valuable it is to them and changing their lives and getting the results they're looking for. Not even just results, just being able to live a life more freely in what they knew was possible. Cause I think oftentimes we think, that's fantastic, but I can't be like that. And the truth is they can. It's just, it takes work to get there, and you need to get yourself around the right people. And that's the only way that, I've found, if I want to move fast, my next mentor right now is Bedros Killian. I'm getting mentored by him very specifically because he represents somebody that I want to grow into. Not I don't want to be him, but he's an example of somebody that's done things that I want to do in an authentic way, that's real, that really brings deep meaning and impact. And so, I'm telling people to come get mentored because I'm doing it myself still too. Like, I don't want to not have a mentor to the point where I want to expand. And if that's something that you want to do for yourself, like, let's go. Like, there's people out there doing these things, changing their lives, being able to reorient that story and actually having even more meaning afterwards than before. Because before, you most likely, when you got on the job and you have that darkness right now, you didn't realize why you were choosing that job in the first place. Like, I didn't realize because I was dyslexic and I was insecure as a boy and I had this black and white thinking around Christianity and sin and all these things, that was the reason why I stepped into that. I had no idea at that time. I just thought, oh, that's cool. That feels right for me. I want to do this. And then I chased after it. I didn't know what was going on under the surface. And then we get to that point where, like, well, what the fuck? Like, what's going on right now? Like, how did this happen? And then when you start to take ownership of the fact you didn't know, you're not broken. Like, I think there's a lot of guys out there that think that they're broken and they're not broken. And they think they're alone and they're not alone. And they start to realize, oh wait, I can do something about this. And that's where things start to shift. That's where they start to realize, oh, okay. Like, I get to have more impact and meaning for my family and my legacy. And I can actually do something even more meaningful afterwards. That's something to look to. Like, and that's what we're doing right now, very specifically with relationships and, what is the path afterwards? We're not working with just law enforcement, but we're working with, what is my mission, my vision, and my purpose in my life? How do I even find that? What does that look like? You're talking about changing your story. What is the path? Like, well, I don't even know what my story is. Like, I don't know what the narrative is that I'm telling myself that is going to be the thing that I need to change. Well, how do I do that? Well, we got tools for you. That's why you come over here, because we've already done it. And, just like you went to the academy, the drill instructors all did it before you and they were in your boots beforehand. Now they're just on the other side laughing and they're thinking that, it's just like different. It's just, that's why you move forward with people that have been there, and then they know the direction, the path, the blueprint, the frameworks that need to be that are necessary for you to get on the other side of it, because it's so possible. And I think the hope of it is the thing that is most important, because you have to know that it's possible to have the belief system that it is possible.
It's definitely something that is more common today. If you go back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, the idea of having a mentor or a life coach or something like that was probably foreign to a lot of people.
Mm.
I think that mentorship came, I'll use the word organically. You worked with somebody, you emulated them, hey, can you give me some advice? Seeking out a life coach or a life mentor probably was not on anybody's radar. But if you boil it down to the basics, if you wanted to go learn how to play tennis tomorrow or golf tomorrow or whatever it is, you're going to go hire a coach.
Right.
Yeah, you could go out on a golf course and go swing a golf club. You're not going to get you're not going to, I would imagine, I don't play golf, but I imagine there's very few people who go out on a golf course and just naturally swing a golf club correctly. You may start out, I could do this on my own, I'll read some books. You're going to come to a point you're like, all right, I need to go to a coach. It's the same way when you're talking about a mentor or a life coach. You can realize where you're at in your life and where you want to get to, and it's putting yourself around those people who have gotten to where you want to get to. The big issue, though, is recognizing where you're at in your life and deciding where you want to get to.
Right.
I would imagine there's a lot of us, especially in these careers, we're really good about pissing and moaning about where we're at today.
Oh, 100%.
But if you sat there and go, but where do you want to be? I don't know.
Yeah.
This sucks right now, but I don't know where I want to be.
Right.
That, I think, is the big bridge that you got to get across, is actually deciding where you want to get to and then put yourself in and around the people who, like you said, have gotten there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the vision of it is like, well, you get the why of it. Like, well, why am I doing this? Because then that gets you through the hard stuff. Like, we're not going to stop eating shit sandwiches. Like, life is just full of problems. Les Brown says you're either in a problem, going to a problem, or coming from a problem. It's around, how do I orient myself around the fact that that's just life? And how do I change problems to not being a bad thing, but that's just part of life. And maybe I can turn it into a good thing. Maybe it's a positive thing. You know, I see problems so differently now where it's like, this is exciting because now I get to step into a challenge of how do I overcome this? Because if we didn't have problems, life would be super boring. That's why we became cops. It's like, I'm going to solve problems. And so that goal of, well, what is it? You know, when you think about it, there's a lot of fitness coaches, right? The goal is I want to feel better. I want to look better. Well, you have to like, that's an easy thing to be like, that's what I want to look like. And then the work in between, it's arduous and it's difficult, and nutrition and working out. But when it comes to this deeper stuff, that's where we like, I don't know what I want to do after this. Like, this gives me enough purpose, or like, what is the goal for me? What do I want my life to reflect? Do I spend more time with my kids? Am I around the people I really want to be around? Am I getting to choose those things? Or is it, there's gonna be a lot of guys and women that they end their careers and they're now living on they're living on a fixed income, and they only can do certain things because I spent my, 20, how many years it is that they spent between 20 and 30, or like me, it would be like 10. I spent all this time doing this, and then now I'm on a fixed income. And now, the interest is going up. Everything is getting more expensive, and I'm getting smaller piece of the pie. What do you want your life to look like? And then you start to get yourself, like you were saying, around the people, but then it's the belief systems of like, is it possible? And then being really clear on it, being able to have clarity around what does that actually look like and what is possible for somebody like me, because people think they need to be something different. Like I'm not that smart. I'm dyslexic. I've done stupid things, and I figured it out. So it should give a lot of people hope. Like, an idiot like this can go do it. And then, I can do it, because that's it. Like, you can do it. And then you just start moving towards it. It's just, how much are you willing to invest in that, in the process of getting to those goals? Like, are those, because not everybody has to have massive goals where they're creating businesses that are producing like millions to tens of millions, 100 millions in revenue, but they can do other things that they get to spend more time, like, your time freedom and being with your family and being able to be around the people you want to be. That's really important. I mean, that's going to really change the quality of your life. Like, extraordinary relationships is the thing that I think a lot of us stay in this for the relationships, because we feel bonded to the other people that are around us, because they know what we experience, right? They know what it's like. Like, in that there's a lot of separation. That's why cops always marry nurses, because they kind of understand each other. They understand the shift work. They understand the trauma that they experience. But then, there's a lot of relationships where, your spouse doesn't know what is it that I experience. And then there's that disconnect. It's a lot to carry, but how do I move forward with it?
You could use a word like you, in my mind, when you were talking about it, and I was thinking about the physical fitness aspect, I see a picture on Instagram or whatever it is, that's what I want to look like. And the thing we have to also be aware of is that was a photo shoot, more than likely. They probably prepped for that photo shoot. It's curated.
Yeah.
But there is the thing of, you talk about it, I did 25 years and now all I have is this fixed income. My long way around all this is it goes back to deciding what you want, whether you want to use the word invest, whether you want to use the word sacrifice, whether you want to use the word compromise. It's going to take you giving up something to get to where you want to get to. You're going to give up a little bit now to save and invest your money so that when you do retire, you can go enjoy your life. You're going to have to give up something now that extra alcohol, that extra cheeseburger, whatever it is, to look like the person. And where I'm going with this is that we always look at the end result. We don't ever talk about the road to get there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep.
We always talk about, hey, I want to be a cop. We don't really talk about, oh, I've got to go through the academy. It sucks while you're doing it, but you see the end goal. And so where I'm going with this is that's what it's all about. It's deciding where you want to get to and then be willing to commit to the sacrifice to get there.
Yeah. No, and Paul, you bring up a great point. It's actually, there's an analogy I use with all my clients and the guys I work with I call it the house of beliefs. And, if you were to look at a house, most people are looking at the roof, which would be the completed version of the house, and that those are the results, the outcomes I'm looking for. But they don't recognize the ground they build it on, the frame structure of what that actually requires to get to the top of the roof, like what those parts of the process are. And what I found is that when we start to examine what our belief systems are, that is actually the roots and the foundation of the house. And that when we start to understand what our beliefs are, then we can start to understand what our standards are. Once we figure out what our standards are, we can get to the floor and actually find the discipline that is required to consistently make those actions over and over again, where then you start to build the structure of the house. And that's built through action and consistency. And then you get to the ceiling of it all, and you're starting to see the formation of this house that you're building until you finally put the roof on top of the house. You're not ever going to get to see or experience what the results of the roof is and the shade that it provides and the rain that it and snow that it keeps out of the house until you start to examine what's going on underneath the surface. And that is the thing that, we've been working on with men, is that, at that belief system level, what are the beliefs that are actually holding you back from those pieces? Because sometimes it's not as much effort as they think it is. It's actually a little bit of resistance and a couple of tweaks along the way. And then all of a sudden, especially people, especially your audience in law enforcement, and my experience in law enforcement was like, we understand consistency and discipline. Like, they beat it into our heads in the academy, the repetitiveness, the training, and all of those things. Like, we are capable of doing those things because we made it through that. It's just making those small, giving up the sugar, giving up the alcohol, those are just external pieces, but those go a long way. Like, what you put in your body does actually affect how you feel in it, and that can change even your mind around it. Like, sometimes, I know a lot of the guys we work with is they have low testosterone levels. Well, why? I mean, it's not just TRT's the fix. It's like, well, why is it low? Because that causes the pieces of depression that's being over diagnosed, or the clarity or the fog that they're experiencing. What are the things that they need to do differently that's going to actually make them experience, oh, you know what? There's actually hope for this. And like, it is a sacrifice, but I think it's worth it. That's something that I made a part of my life. And it does change the trajectory of it. Like, if you want to actually experience something different and stop complaining about it, then you have to, everybody's doing it. That gets to that level. You have to do the work. It's just, the fastest way is just through mentorship. That's what, as I've found.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The other component to it is once you decide what you want, you need to put yourself, not just in the sense of a mentor or a coach, you need to put yourself around like-minded people.
Yes.
And so if you want to stop drinking and you want to eat better, going and hanging out with your buddies at the local bar and having wings and beers on Friday nights, it's going to catch up. So it's you got to find, and it may not necessarily be give it all up, but it's got to, I remember we had a guy at my old agency who was an avid runner. Mm-hmm. And we were getting ready for the annual law enforcement relay race, and he gave our team speech. And he goes, I'm sure a lot of you look at me and think my number one priority every day is to go for a run. He goes, no, it's not that it's my number one priority. It's just that it's the priority over sitting on the couch and doing nothing. Wherever it falls into your priority scale, I just make sure that it sits above not doing anything, being lazy, sitting on my ass. That's all you need to do is you just need to move it up your priority scale. It doesn't have to be your number one priority, but if I want to stop drinking, then it's got to be a higher priority than going and hanging out with my buddies at the bar. Yeah. If I want to look better, it's got to be a higher priority than I think I'll have that next row of Oreos.
Right. It's the small compounding actions that build up over time. And that's how you rewire your nervous system and your neural pathways is you just make those small teeny, it's most guys are surprised. It's just a little bit. Like it took, I didn't cold turkey alcohol. It was like all of a sudden, I think I went on a date with a woman for the first time and she didn't drink. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm not going to drink. She's not drinking. And I kind of liked her. And I was like, that's interesting. She doesn't drink. And then I stopped drinking less. And then it got to a point where I was just drinking less and less. And then this other thing happened and I just quit. And then it was like, I didn't say, well, I'm quit forever. I just said, well, I'm going to quit for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, that turned into 4 weeks. And I was like, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then turn 18 months and then have a drink for 18 months. And it's just the small compounding movements forward. It's just that start piece, right? We were talking about habits earlier. It's the beautiful thing about a habit is at some point in time, you actually don't have to think about it anymore. It just becomes a part of your life. And that it doesn't hurt so much like the sacrifices you're making. It's, I'm on a very strict diet for myself because I was 60 pounds heavier than I was like right now. And, that was, I eat whole foods. I eat predominantly meat, protein, and fruit. And we were out last night. We had a mastermind yesterday. That's why we're here with Bedros. And, we went out with people and I don't stray off of, not because I'm like trying to have an image of it. It just doesn't make me feel good. And so like, it's not even this thing of, well, I'm just not eating the calories because I don't want it. Like, I really want that. It's like, I actually don't even want it because I know how it makes me feel because I went so long without it. And then we're around people that aren't drinking. You're changing your environment. And then when you change your environment, you don't realize that from a science base, like it's actually changing your DNA. And when you start to realize that actually maybe one of the only thing I need to do is get around these people. And then maybe I'll start making those small momental changes. That's where things like, I just need to be around them. I don't even know what's going to happen. And then you start hearing different ideas like, wait, people think like that? I didn't even know you thought like that. Like people can think like that. It's just, and it starts to open up your mind. And, the biggest piece is like, how open are you willing to be challenged on your perspective? Because, I think for me, very specifically, the moment I'm like, I'm always 100% right. That's the moment I'm going to probably hit my head off the wall or something. Like I have to have enough humility to know that I could fuck it up. I'm a human. Like it's like, it doesn't matter how far I've come. Like you still have to have that element of humanity that like, I have a great relationship now. I don't like, I have learned things. I think it's going to be a fantastic relationship, but we don't know what life is going to bring. And so just being able to be humble enough to handle those pieces along the way, that's going to be, for a lot of guys like are listening to this, like the humility to even be able to put yourselves around other people or ask for help or say like, hey, I feel alone. That's massive. Like that is such a huge step forward. Just even to have that one, like, hey, you know what? I think I might need some help. Cause there's no shame around that. Like we're all here, human. We're not perfect. Like there's areas of growth. Like my mindset around growth is there's always going to be room. You can always grow further. As long as it doesn't end, that actually like that terrifies some people. But for me, that gives me hope because I had that end. I had to get to become a police officer. I had to become a trooper. Once I got to the top of that, I jumped off the cliff. So I need something to look forward to constantly. And that otherwise I'll get too clouded in my head and think that I'm so special that, that I might just ruin everything. So it's like, yeah.
Do you ever worry that you won't ever be fully satisfied?
No, I'm very satisfied right now. So I don't really feel as though, I think not having to be complete fulfills me more. So I don't, because I think that was the thing that I really struggled with beforehand. That really, like I had to feel satisfied my view on it is, and I think that's what allows me to have a great relationship with Sabrina is that I don't have to have you be there in order for me to feel complete. And so like we don't need it. We already feel it. And it's, you know, I'm not going to sit here like I feel fulfilled all the time perfectly. I think that would kind of go against, you know, the humility piece, but it's like the striving piece. Like I don't have this view that, there's going to be a day of completion and
maybe satisfied was a wrong word. The sense of challenge. Will there always be the next challenge for you? Or are you going to have to manufacture it?
Well, I think that brings into a really interesting viewpoint of, I think there's always challenges regardless. And my choice, and I heard Joe Rogan say this years ago, is that humans by nature, they're going to always create chaos because that's how we're designed from an instinctual perspective. And that if we don't have challenges in our lives, we'll go and create them subconsciously. And so my view on it is I'm going to create the challenges I want as a choice versus having them show up in my life not as a choice. So the further I get to create my own challenges and I get to like intentionally and consciously choose them, then I'll not have those other problems that show up unexpectedly that are going to totally derail my entire life. And you know, that's the thing, you know, just even that one little perspective and then starting to apply it to the mind was something that really, you know, like, oh, okay, wait, let me create them because they're always going to be there. And, you know, it's really, and especially for men specifically, like challenge is a part of how we were designed. Like we need challenge. It helps us actually increase our testosterone. It's something that's really important where we were meant to expand. And so when we start to take away, that's because that's where purpose comes, is like, I'm challenged and I'm moving towards it. And if I'm not challenged, that's where a lot of guys, I think, you know, like when they retire, they're also not being challenged by something else. And so then they lose that sense of hope and then that's why they end up, their heart starts beating and yeah.
The easy progression, I don't want to say easy progression. Your podcast is about a lot of what we were just talking about. You giving out your take and your interpretation of various things that men or people struggle with.
Yeah.
Where did the catalyst come for you to be like, all right, I want to get into the space where I'm helping others, but now I also want to do it in a public format of, hey, here's me, here's a microphone, and let me be vulnerable?
I think one, it's very difficult to get your message out these days without being publicly facing. And it's, you know, just hopping over certain hurdles of the judgment of, you know, people I know in the job and those components of the show itself. But it was something that I needed to do that so that others could hear the message, and that because I didn't want to, I kind of needed to. And so there was a lot of fear around the idea of exposing myself and my story, not just sharing with somebody like in a conversation over coffee, but like something that's publicly posted, people can come back to and they can cut it up and they can utilize it and they can laugh and this and that. You know, it's a different level of like, I'm working through this piece of fear, but I think that the meaning and the purpose and the impact behind it all, and then changing even the impact for my kids, like they get to see this later when dad's gone. That they get to have a piece of me and the stories about dad and the lessons that maybe they're not ready for them right now, but maybe when I'm like gone, like maybe they'll need them then. And so for me, it's like this, something of giving back and a legacy to, you know, be able to articulate and share the things that I've learned in a way that others can then take from it. That added value of like, oh, okay, I'm in that situation. Well, what do I do with it? And you know, there's a level of like, I used a lot of podcasts and social media. I used social media. I consumed it very differently than most people probably do today. I you know, obviously there's like comedy and there's just funny videos here and there, But for the most part, what I utilized social media for was like working out, diet, personal growth, like mindset stuff. And that was so beneficial to me. And so a big part is like me giving back is to share those stories in a way that, I mean, we've been talking for a while and I've shared a bunch of different things. I've not even touched the surface on the stories that I have from all of the different situations I've been in, because, there's just so many of them. Like we'd probably be here all day and tomorrow, it's just like, there's just so many things, but,
this is going to be the first 19-hour podcast.
Right. So it's just like, I haven't even touched this. There's micro stories and all the other stories, and there's like different details of different like ridiculous things that happened where like, maybe there was a situation at one point where a girlfriend might've stole a gun or something like, there's all kinds of stuff.
So a girlfriend stole a gun.
I'm a roundabout way of saying it, Paul, it's just like, but there's all these different pieces that, we experience, and being able to share that just feels, at first it's like, well, is anybody really going to want to hear this? Like, is this really important? And then being able to, continue to push forward through that, knowing that, no, this will catch fire because this is a message. People need to hear this stuff. And then, it's just time, like being able to, anything I've ever found is that anything meaningful really does take time. And, that is something that needs to be passed on more,
I'm sure you probably already have gotten it, but if you haven't, there's something about deciding, especially from the podcast realm, to jump into that, to be another needle in the stack of needles, to commit to putting out a quality product and getting that, whether it be a text message, whether it be a feedback on a post or something, but somebody's going to give you that, hey, I appreciate what you said right there. And that'll make it all worth it. And it'll be the fuel to just keep going.
Yeah. So it's interesting too, because I think when you're first starting out with this stuff too, like the negative, the universe is interesting. It's not really about how good we are or how much impact we want to make. It's more about how much am I willing to eat the shit through to get forward through it. Because in the beginning stages, especially on Instagram, we started mostly on Instagram. It's like, oh, you have 100 followers, you suck, or this or that. And then the negative window you have to break through to get to the other side of it is, it feels impossible for some people. But the consistency of that showing up, like, and not letting people that honestly, like, when I see those negative comments, I'm just like, dude, they just hurt. Like, you're just hurt, and you're not there yet where you want to be able to hear this message, and it's triggering you in a way that, it's reflecting something to you, because why did you spend the energy to actually even, like, if I didn't see something I didn't like, I didn't comment on it. It wasn't like I just moved past it, but something inside of you caused you to be upset with this. And now you need to put that energy in there, and you want to try to trigger me into responding back to you in a way that's going to be negative and creating more of that momentum, or discourage people trying to do good things to like stop doing those things. Cause when you first start out, like, you're telling me earlier, you have one camera and this, and like, it doesn't look pretty. You're learning how to talk. You're how do I communicate a good story? And how do I, do all these components that are brand new, especially coming from law enforcement. Like, I think there's an even bigger hurdle to jump over because of all the, we experience things like, don't ever get on social media. Don't put yourself out there. Don't put your house out there. Like, people will come and kill you. And, that's an even bigger hurdle than, most of the kids now, they're like, I want a personal brand. And it's just part of their culture. And so it's like, oh, it's normal to post myself on social media. Whereas like for you, especially like, you're a little bit older than me, like you, like it's just a teeny bit. So, but to get over those hurdles of like, that's how we grew up, especially in the culture of law enforcement. I had policies like, hey, you can't post and tell people this. Otherwise you'll be held responsible for it. I had a situation last summer where, I posted something and it got back to my job and they were upset. And I was like told to take it down. I was told I couldn't do that. I was going to lose my position, that they weren't happy with it, about it. And, I had to like sit with that because it was real. It wasn't just somebody angry with me. It was real life consequences of like, oh, okay. Like, cause at that point I wasn't sure if I was coming back or not or whatever, what was going on. It was, oh, okay. There's like real life consequences to this. Like I could be on the road again and I could be working, this shift or whatever. Like you get there was more fear for us to not do those things. And so to overcome that, anybody that's listening to this, like you can overcome the things that are holding you back. Like the fear is usually the thing that is the direction you need to go. Like it's usually the fear itself actually can create the actual reality that you're trying to avoid just simply by being in fear of it. But that's the hurdle. It's like, I gotta do something different than I'm uncomfortable doing. And then, when I see uncomfortable, like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's like, oh, okay, no, that's the path. That's where I have to go because then that will help me expand and I won't have as much fear around that. And, there'll be something fulfilling on it. Like, I think the next thing I'm doing next is, and now I'm going to state it publicly at this point, right? Is I'm going to step into doing some kind of like stand-up comedy where not like I'm like, oh, I want to be a comedian, but like a challenge to myself so I can get better public speaking. So I can be funnier when I'm going on stages and sharing this message. And just to get over the fact that I'm going to sound so stupid, like in the beginning parts of that and getting comfortable with sounding stupid. Because then once I get over that piece, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to die from that. Then, okay, it's not so bad.
I recently had a guest on, Michael D'Angelo. He's a former Marine who's now all the Marines ready to shoot me. He's a Marine, but he was in the Marine Corps. He's now a comedian. He started the Rapid Fire Comedy Tour. But one of the things that he said to me is he's like, I was always a writer. And so I'd had this notebook with all these ideas. And kind of like what you're saying, his motivation was to be a better public speaker. He's like, you know what, maybe I should go do one of these open mic nights. And so he went through however many of these in a random bar or whatever. And then the experience of actually doing the first time at a comedy club and the complete different experience of people are there for a comedy show. So now they're paying attention to me. And there's not somebody in the background yelling out an order for, wings and a beer. There's not sports on the TV in the background. There's not people coming in and out of the door. They were actually paying attention to him. And the way I took it was not necessarily that his material was any different, but it lands differently when you're not competing with all of the other factors, when everybody's there to look at you and to watch you. So if you get into it, just understand your first couple or your first instance of it, maybe an open mic night at a place that's not a comedy club, but push through until you actually get on stage at a comedy club to see the difference.
Yeah, I could imagine the energy is so different, and like the silence would probably feel like it would cut you. Like it's just.
Well, then he was talking about how he grew into the comedy scene and started working at comedy clubs, and so now you learn the business of comedy, where some places, hey, they just want butts in the seats, anybody off the street.
Yeah.
But the better ones curate the audience. So if somebody comes in and they're, 3 or 4 guys and they've been out drinking all, oh, let's go to a comedy show, and they're plowed hammering. Hey guys, not here, because they're going to disrupt not only the comedian's experience, they're going to disrupt the audience's experience, being able to interact with and get something from the comedian. So there's so many levels to it that I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's interesting because, if you have people in there that are cocked and they're just heckling the comedian, like it just totally ruins it for everybody else. Mm-hmm. And then they can't even because like it truly is an art form. Like it's artistic and just even the pauses they do are so intentional and how they, string or weave the story. And I love comedy. I think I'm funny with people. Like I'm funny with Sabrina. I'm funny like hanging out and stuff. I don't find myself to be
funny. Like I amuse you like I'm a clown.
Yeah, I could be a clown, but I don't know about how standing on a stage and then trying to tell a story to be funny. And then like people, it's such a different level of funny, and being able to, because all those guys too, like, they didn't all of a sudden just like, oh, I'm just really good at this. And I'm just not funny.
They never bomb.
Yeah.
Just ask them.
Right. So it's just like that getting over that failure. I'm actually looking to just fucking fall on my face. It's just
Have you started writing like
No, I'm not there yet. It was one of those things I kind of came up with this. I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to do this. And so I was like, all right, I'll have to figure out, I don't know where I would do it yet. So I got to figure out that component. Like it took me a while to find a Toastmasters to join to do public speaking stuff. But, I'll have to figure out, I might have to drive to Boston for it or whatever. So I don't think that there's somebody local I can do it, but it's going to be an interesting challenge of failure to intentionally move towards it.
What's the long-term vision for you 10 years down the road? Where do you see yourself?
I see myself, right now we're building this business that's specifically around mentoring men that want to, have extraordinary relationships. They want to have like discipline beyond fitness, and, they're dealing with all those shame pieces, and they're dealing with vices. They're dealing with like toxic relationships or whatever it is they're experiencing. And they know that there's more and they want to get there. That I see that kind of stemming into public speaking. I want to be able to speak at events and kind of share this message more publicly, more from a larger audience standpoint from stage. And I see I've kind of dabbled with this entrepreneurial world. So like, we are starting a business very specific, but also like, I've gotten really interested in sales and marketing and especially leadership. We experience leadership in a very different, in a very structured way that's militaristic. But like understanding leadership and how it impacts our families, like and then that impacting more people's lives and being able to bring them resources and to build a business that actually impacts people, that brings a quality product, and it brings, revenue that can be spread to their employees, and it actually makes an impact in many different ways. And so I'll probably start to become more of a serial entrepreneur at some point where I'm not too many things. I want to make sure I'm building the right things. And, so I don't really know. Right now, I'm just kind of focused. This is like with the ADHD, the dyslexic brain. I'm like, I want to do all these things, but I can't do all of them. So right now we're just focused on this. And then when this is up and running and we're able to have it like really solidified, I'll grab something else to, I have my best friend, Justin. He's a phenomenal guy. Like we'll probably do something together at some point. And we actually ran our first live event back in November up in Vermont, and doing some of those are I really enjoy this right here where you're right in front of me, and like there's benefits to Zoom and people can connect and social media and stuff like that, but being in person with people really does have a massive impact. And so we're going to be gearing up to do some of those things, just. It's going to be fun. Like I'm excited for the not just the impact, but just like, I think, if we can't make life fun too, like that's like, what are we doing? Like let's laugh. Let's laugh about it.
Life has to be serious
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. It's exhausting.
As we head on out, any last pieces of wisdom, advice?
Now if they want more advice or they want my channel, I'm at Tony J. Bova. It's the Tony Bova Show. You can find me online there or my Instagram handle. And, I think if you are in that hard space right now, you're not broken. You're not alone. That there is hope. But you have to decide. It's a choice, and nobody's going to do it for you. I can't choose it for you. Nobody else around you can choose it for you. You have to decide that, but there is resources for those that want to choose to do that.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate you taking the time to come on down and be on the podcast and sharing your story.
Thanks, Paul.
I wish you all the best going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
As always, thank you for listening or watching the episode. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out on social media or send me an email. The links are all in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you're not already, please follow the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe on YouTube. And if you would, please leave me a rating. Ratings do two things. You can tell me what I need to fix or improve, and the more ratings also gets the podcast recommended to more people. Another ask, please share the podcast with anyone you think could benefit from and enjoy it. And last, don't forget, sign up for the newsletter.